your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker, in the newsroom. We'll look at some of the company stories we're following. Let's start off with Eli Lilly shares. They are down almost 1%. Their Alzheimer's disease drug faces further delays in gaining approval. U.S. regulators planning to hold a hearing of external advisors to explore just how safe the therapy is and just how well it works. The FDA decision to hold an advisory panel hearing, that's actually a major surprise. Comes just weeks before the FDA was expected to rule on approving the drug. They want to hear from outside experts to, quote, further understand topics related to evaluating the safety and efficacy of the drug. And U.S. investigators looking into another incident involving Boeing 737 MAX airliner. This is a case in which the plane's rudder system malfunctioned as pilots were landing. Pilots on a United Airlines Holdings 737 MAX 8 said the pedals that control the rudder became stuck as they touched down at Newark Liberty Airport February 6th. Of the incident is the latest involving Boeing's top-selling jetliner, which was grounded worldwide in 2019. It follows the second of two fatal crashes that killed 346 people. Earlier this year, a panel covering an unused door on a 737 MAX 9. You remember that. That blew open in flight because it wasn't properly attached with the bolts. And for the first time, women will don Major League Baseball jerseys in MLB The Show. This is the long-running popular video game. It's made by a Sony San Diego studio. MLB The Show 24 will debut the option to create and play a female player in a reinvented version of the game's career mode, Road to the Show. And that's your company news.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence. I'm Alex Steele, here along with Paul Sweeney and John Tucker. We are live from the Interactive Broker Studio right here in New York. You can catch us on the radio, obviously, and also live on YouTube. Let's get you some world and national news right now with Michael Barr. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex, Paul, John. President Joe Biden delivered a spirited State of the Union speech before a joint session of Congress last night. Biden laced into GOP frontrunner Donald Trump without mentioning him by name.
After another shooting in Iowa recently, he said, when asked what to do about it, he said, just get over it. There's his quote, just get over it. I say, stop it.
Biden also talked about several subjects, including Russia. Bloomberg's Roz Matheson.
Well, certainly there again, he was contrasting himself with Donald Trump. He was saying that Trump really allowed Putin, emboldened the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and then he subsequently invaded Ukraine, and that only he can push to contain Putin from potential further ambition when it comes to Europe, that Donald Trump would not be engaged in that. So saying he would be acting in the interest of the U.S. there.
Bloomberg's Roz Matheson. In the Republican response, Senator Katie Britt of Alabama talked about issues like the border crisis and inflation.
The American people are scraping by, while President Biden proudly proclaims that Bidenomics is working. Goodness, y'all, bless his heart, we know better.
Senator Britt spoke from her kitchen table in Montgomery. France held an historic ceremony today to put the right to abortion in its constitution. It comes as the world marks International Women's Day. An emergency landing in Los Angeles for a United Airlines flight bound for Japan. A wheel fell off shortly after takeoff from San Francisco. This man was one of 235 passengers on board who said, "We lost a what?"
Obviously, when you are missing a wheel, just landing, you get nervous about that. Are we going to crash? Are we going to, just all those things kind of run through your mind.
The wheel crashed into a parking lot, damaging several cars. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
These are all the headlines you want. These are all the headlines you want when you are on when you're flying. This is good times. It's great. Cool. Okay. Yeah, he'll be great. Meanwhile, other people going to spring break may or may not be going to Miami. This is an amazing article.
It is.
apparently Miami is breaking up with spring breakers. So Miami's just fed up with the rowdy college kids doing the sort of thing that rowdy college kids do. And they spent $250,000 on a campaign, including a video that declares it's breaking up with spring break. We're looking at drunk driving checkpoints, 6 p.m. curfew on the beach, no access to city garages or sidewalk seating on the famed Ocean Drive. Huge.
In the 80s, when I was in my spring break prime, it was Fort Lauderdale. Let me just say that the wet t-shirt contest at the Elbow Room on the Strip in Fort Lauderdale, legendary.
Wait, but that's coming back. Isn't Fort Lauderdale like now the place?
No, they got rid of that, and so they right after the 80s, I think they said enough. So sometime in the 90s, they said boom. So now the kids go to Daytona. A big one is South Padre Island down in Jess Metten's woods down in Texas. They welcome the kids down there, and there's gonna be like a gajillion kids heading down there.
I'm trying to change all this so they all go to for the spring break to Spring Lake, New Jersey.
Exactly.
Get really rowdy.
Yeah, really rowdy at the
right outside Paul's
house. Exactly. But yeah, so it's tough. And if you're Miami, this is your time. I mean, you're like you're becoming a financial hub. All the big New York people are moving down there, and it's always been a great city. Now it just seems like it's going crazy. And they don't want these knuckleheads coming down there.
I mean, but this is all like a Ken Griffin thing.
Yeah.
Basically, like when you leave Connecticut and you leave New York and all the hedge fund guys go to Florida, they don't want to be, barfed on at a bar by a 20-year-old. You know what I mean? So there's a different reputation now. But this definitely feels like a big end of an era situation.
No, the kids will just find the next market. I mean, they go international now. They go to Mexico, to the islands. But South Padre Island, I heard, is a big place. It will never beat Fort Lauderdale in the 80s. Big.
I'm amazed at how much you know about this right now.
Oh, yeah.
You were hip to the kids.
Very good.
Much more coming up on the next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour in our C-suite discussion, we're going to check in with Virginie Duperot, CFO of Arcadis. Arcadis is global design, engineering, and management consulting companies. We're going to get to see what's happening in that business right there. And it's Friday. That means we talk municipal bonds, and we'll do that with Amanda Albright. Alex is all fired up to talk muni bonds. Sunny Bunnell, co-founder and CEO at Motto, on navigating the future in the face of rapid AI advancements and how a visionary leadership serves as a catalyst for competitive advantage. So we've got all that coming up in this hour. Let's kick it all off with Mr. John Tucker on the Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Alex and Paul, stocks are adding to Thursday's record close. We have 8 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500. They are higher right now. Communication services is in the lead. The biggest drag that's coming from consumer staples. The unemployment rate did climb to a 2-year high for the month of February. Got that data this morning. Wage growth, that slowed even as the payrolls continue to grow at a pretty solid pace. So all this points to a cooler yet resilient labor market in the U.S. Meantime, Seema Shah, principal global investors, say, you know what, the fundamentals in the stock market support the record levels where we find ourselves at.
I actually don't think of this as a bubble at the moment. You know, this market is backed up by strong economic growth. Earnings growth is positive. So unless you're really starting to see valuations move up, which are not backed up by that progression in earnings, I don't think we can consider it as a bubble.
Again, the S&P 500 is higher, adding to its record, 20 points higher right now, up 0.4%, 5175. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 95 points higher, and the S&P, the Nasdaq 100 right now up 18 points. That's a rise of just about 0.1%. The Russell 2000 1.2% higher. Among the best performing stocks in the S&P 500, Carnival, Etsy, Advanced Micro Devices. Worst performer, Costco right now. Lack of a hike in membership fees, as some analysts worried there. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube, so you can head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast. That's the easiest way to find all that content there. And we're also in your dashboard, Apple CarPlay, so you can find us all there. Everywhere you can find us, our content. John was just mentioning we got the S&P 500 up 0.3%. Let's check in with Nora Melinda and get some stock-specific movers in the market. Nora, what are you looking at?
Well, I'm watching the biggest gainer in the S&P 500 right now. That's Carnival. It's up earlier, jumping as much as 7%, and Stifel is touting the cruise liner's healthy booking pattern. It expects the demand to drive a full-year guidance raise when the company reports earnings later this month.
But, I'm surprised.
I'm not.
You're not surprised?
No. I mean, people I talk to, they're still spending on experiences. I don't know. I mean, it's...
I mean, I guess
years of backlog, you could argue.
Bank of America was talking about how household income is still rising. So, like, it's not as bad. You can kind of see that in the hiring, right? It's experience hiring. You had a lot of, like, servers and all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's part of it.
And I saw a story, there's a wave season, which is, I guess that's when kind of the winter months when the waves are a little bit higher and it's not as good cruising time. Typically, that's when you find some deals. Not this year.
Yeah, but those ships now, they are real high tech. I mean, they have those stabilizer fins.
And that works until it doesn't. Like, you still see videos online of these ships getting, tossed and turned.
Everyone's seasick.
But I just had some friends who've never been on a cruise before. They went to the Galapagos with their family, and they were saying that they had, like, weird vertigo stuff for, like, 5 days after they got back. Yeah. Anyway, but
that's terrible.
That stock has nosebleeds levels. I don't know. There's some relationship to be made between waves and the stock price.
All right, we're just looking at those stocks for the cruisers on a trailing 12-month basis. Carnival up 56%, Norwegian up 32%, Royal Caribbean up 76%. So just love that business. And again, my memory from the first days of the pandemic is all those companies rushing to the bond market and dumping and selling as much debt as they could because they knew they were going to need the cash. Burn to support that. All right, what else you got?
Let's take a look at General Electric. Those shares are climbing as much as 5.6%. This is its highest intraday since 2017. And this comes just a day after the company said that its aerospace sees its initial dividend payout at 30% of net income. And so today we had JP Morgan upgrading on the aerospace strength there from the company. Of course, it reaffirmed its 2024 and 2025 guidance and said that valuation is an obstacle. This is JP Morgan saying that valuation is an obstacle for the stock, but they do still see upside remaining here.
And I should point out, props to David Weston. He had an interview with the CEO of Vernova as well as Larry Culp yesterday. It's rolling out today on Wall Street Week, talking about like managing a business. Like, hey, trim costs, less layers, like be more efficient in addition to growing and doing stuff. But I was looking through one of their presentations and man, their potential for services revenue on the power side is tremendous.
Yep. I'm just looking at the stock here. It's at a 52-week high, not all-time high, but a 52-week high. It's up 34% year to date, and up 97% on a trailing 12-month basis. Wow. So good for them. That stock is back. Karen Ubelhart from Bloomberg Intelligence has been talking that name for a long time. She's covered it almost since the beginning of time, and so she knows it pretty well. But the company today is nothing like it was 10 years, 15, 20 years. It's literally a fraction of its size, but maybe it's a better stock going forward. So good stuff. What else we got?
Lastly, I wanted to look at Eli Lilly. That company is sliding as much as 2.8%. Now, this is coming after its Alzheimer's drug decision was delayed by the FDA. The regulators are planning on holding a hearing of external advisors because they really want to get some external insight as to explore whether or not this is a safe therapy and how well it works. And this is, of course, the latest string of setbacks for Lilly's drug. And as we think about this, it's just really interesting watching this company. And investors are really not happy this morning.
But the stock, I mean, let's put it in context, too. I mean, the stock's up 32% year to date, up 148% over the past year, and this stock's got a ton going for it. I think a lot of analysts out there, a lot of the pharma analysts, this is their top pick because they have their hands in so many pretty good growth businesses. I mean, when you look at the pharma companies, when I look at the research from the pharma analysts, they kind of just say, what's the total market size of what they're going after?
Yep.
You know, and then what percentage do I think their drug or, you know, whatever can get, and you build up your sales models that way.
Right.
So the more successes you have in more areas, and Eli Lilly just happens to have a number of successes in a lot of really fast-growing areas, and you can see that, you know, in a lot of their top-line growth.
Yeah. All right, Nora, thanks a lot. Nora Melinda joining us from Bloomberg. And then to that point, you could really see that play out during the pandemic, well, I guess post-pandemic, because it was all about, say, Pfizer and Moderna, because they were the guys that had the vaccines, right?
Yep.
But then it's really the diversified players, because now Moderna is getting hurt.
Yes.
Because they don't yet have something else.
Right, exactly. So it kind of comes back to, just love the pharmaceutical and the biotech industry, because for the biotech companies, it's hit or miss. And if you hit, you can monetize that by going public. You can, you know, or have your stock, if you're public, just quadruple, one of those things. Or another exit is just to sell to an Eli Lilly or a Merck.
And they're like, okay, bring it.
Yep.
Let's do it. So really interesting there. So that stock is down by about 1.4%. Let's talk about the real economy for a moment.
The real world.
Yeah, let's talk about the real world here. So Arcadis is a company based in Amsterdam, but the bulk of their revenue really now comes from the US and Canada. And they do things like sustainable design, engineering, consultancy solutions for assets. They build stuff. And just to make Paul happy, they are also working on the Hudson Tunnel project.
Oh, thank you.
That's going to get about $12 billion in federal funding. It includes 2 4.5-mile-long tracks and tunneling. It's a big deal. So I always love checking on these companies because they're the people who are putting, you know, shovels in the ground, right? And that's what we really want to understand. And we're lucky now to join Virginie Duperat. She is CFO of Arcadis. She's in town joining us. It's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Paul, and very happy to be with you this morning.
So in Amsterdam, over in Europe, I should say, we're at a 52-week high for the stock, earnings super good. You got a strong story. I just want to get your take on kind of how's it going? Like, what demand is like? Where in the world are you seeing the most demand and for what stuff?
Thank you, Alex. I think that we are in a very buoyant moment. Frankly, it is not started yesterday. Already, I think, you know, just after COVID, we started to see some changes. But definitely, there is quite an ask at the moment for more sustainable things and quite a change also. We see a lot of traction in the sustainability space, both in Europe and on the US continent. And that happens in very different areas, such as climate adaptation, obviously, if you think about some of the storms that are increasing, but also the rainfalls that now you can get, you know, the volume of a month within an hour. And then cities need to adapt.
In New York, we definitely feel that.
After.
Go ahead. So to that point, though, I hear you, and politically as well, you get the CHIPS Act here, the Infrastructure Act, and the IRA, and there's so much money to be deployed so quickly. But I'm seeing a disconnect, particularly in industrials, about backlog and projects versus actually getting money, like people actually ponying up the cash. Are you guys noticing that right now, too?
If we are honest, we need to admit, you know, that all these stimulus packages in some respect have created some sort of a pause because suddenly, you know, people are saying, I could get a bunch of money. So then, you know, I should wait to make my decisions. We've been some people hesitating between the stimulus in Europe versus the stimulus in the US. But what we can see is that traction is now coming. We already have a first project. For example, we work on the Nano Research Center in New York, Albany, which is funded by stimulus package money. And we still have other projects coming in. We also have the same thing in Europe with a very large semiconductor factory in Germany, 1 mile per 1 mile, so a very large thing. And definitely, there is the need for more of these elements, and then this is going to happen. But probably H2 will be showing us more of that.
So I would think for your business, those projects that you work on are just so multi-year projects. What kind of visibility do you have into your business going forward?
We have quite a long-term visibility. Our way of recording backlog, whatever, is very conservative, and then our backlog at any moment is not more than 10 months. But if we consider our entire pipeline, quite a number of our projects, like the Hudson Tunnel you are referring to, it's a several years project. So we have visibility in what's going to happen. We recently signed a strong project in Europe with Shell about gas extraction cleaning to get the remediation of the soil and convert that, potentially either back into farmland when it's remediated or into different sort of air compression storage, for example, for energy. So this type of project give you a 10-year visibility. On some other different things, we have also large frameworks with some clients, that also want us to accompany on the long time, and very long-lasting relationship here in the US with more than 70 years with some clients.
Yeah, and I know that at least in my world, when I do energy transition stuff, a lot of businesses are just like, they're staying in the queue for stuff, even if they don't need it or they don't have the money right now, because it just takes so long to get on the line, which then benefits like companies like yours at the end of the day. I'm interested in terms of how you're managing costs. Like, where are you still seeing inflation? Where are you seeing deflation? And where do you feel like prices are sticky?
So I think we've been over the worst phase of inflation, obviously. But at the end of the day, when we talk about, such a large project like the Hudson Tunnel or other project we are in, the share of cost that we represent is super small. So I wouldn't be honest if I'm not admitting, that pushing inflation in our revenue has not been really a key question. That's been something, that the way we organize, the way we work, and what we deliver, for our clients has been something quite smooth, and the operating performance of the last few years have shown that.
So what type of specific consulting services do you provide? You focus, just trying to get a sense of what role you guys play in these different projects.
So Arcadis would be able to intervene around any natural or built asset from the very beginning, conception, thinking and such, down to remediation and potentially dismantling. So that's where we operate, and in that space, we will never take any construction risk. This is not where we operate, but we are really an advisor, a consultant that will be able to give environmental permitting, for example, or design, construction, architecture also. Things about the Fifth Avenue. We've been recently refurbishing the Tiffany store, but
that's you guys.
Yes.
Ah, okay. All right.
I hope you like a discount.
Yeah, right. So what is the hardest part of your business right now? Like, what keeps you up at night as CFO?
What keeps me up at night? My kids more than my job.
For sure. I totally get that.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm just curious as to what the hardest part of your job is.
This is a very fragmented portfolio. So, you need to have a view on everything, and you need to admit also that you can't have a view on everything at the same time. So it's the way you are organized, the way you make people, have the information that they need to make the relevant decision at any moment. And part of our new strategic cycle is really around that. There's more project outside that project that we can seize. So then what do we do internally to make sure that our sales force has the capability to make the right decision and not work on a first in, first out mode,
I see they have about 35,000 employees. Is it hard to attract and retain employees in your business?
There are some difficult elements, but obviously we've worked a lot on that. Maybe 1.5 years ago, we were above 14% attrition rate, which was quite high just after COVID.
Yep.
So we worked a lot into that, trying to understand what's happening. In terms of engagement score, now we closed the year of 52, which puts us in the highest quartile of our industry. And our attrition is down, just above 11%.
Are you back in Amsterdam? Are you back to office? Hybrid? What are you doing?
We are hybrid. We've reduced our office footprint by 35%,
Really?
over the last, yes.
So what is your policy? How does it work for you guys?
So
in Amsterdam, for example.
Well, I would not talk about the headquarters, because this is not where it is buoyant and where you have the life of the company. But in a normal office where we operate for project and for client, number one, you potentially have people with the client
Yep.
on mixed site working on the project.
Right.
from time to time, if we can do it, we love, having those teams in our offices because that's, quite attractive and stimulate everyone. And we encourage them to come in the office 2 to 3 days a week, but we have, broken our capabilities in terms of open spaces and such to create more collaborative spaces where a team would gather and go into a specific meeting that they have prepared and where they want to collaborate on.
Okay. All right, Virginie, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. It was really wonderful to get that perspective. Virginie Duperrat, she joins us, Arcadis Chief Financial Officer. You jealous of the work? Yeah, he is. He wants the remote radio working. Exactly. That's Paul's thing.
It works.
This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. This is Bloomberg Business Flash. And we are brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. So the latest jobs report reinforces bets the Fed's going to start cutting rates in June. Looks like that's fully priced in right now by investors. Employment surpassed expectations while wage gains moderated. So this all adds to signs of a healthy economic growth and softer inflation. And Eli Lilly's Alzheimer's disease drug, that is facing further delays in gaining approval. U.S. regulators planning to hold a hearing of external advisors to explore how safe the therapy may be, how well it works. After that, Lilly shares, they fell. They're down right now 1.9%. Now, overall, the markets, the major averages, all in the green, but they have moderated some of the earlier gains right now. S&P 500 up only 6 points right now, up 0.1%, 51.63. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 89 points higher. The NASDAQ 100, that, in fact, has turned lower, down 52 points right now. That is a decline of 0.3%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Now on Bloomberg Intelligence, Munis in Focus.
All right, today's Focus on Munis is brought to you by Build America Mutual. Build America Mutual insures U.S. municipal bonds that finance essential American infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be part of building America. Invest in BAM.
BAM. Come on,
insured
Alex.
bonds.
Get on this.
Bam!
That's
Bam, bam, bam.
All right, we'll get Matt Miller in here soon. Maybe you can get him to record something.
But we can have him call in and just say the word BAM and just
do the
repeat
BAM
it.
and
Yeah.
we'll pay him for that. All right, let's talk munis because this Friday, Amanda Albright joins us. She's a muni finance reporter for Bloomberg News, joining us via Zoom from Kansas. Good stuff out there. So, Amanda, thanks so much for joining us here. One of the stories that kind of got my attention recently was Rivian, that factory. I think they're pausing building that factory, and that can't be good for our good friends down in Georgia. What's going on?
Yeah, super interesting story yesterday. Ed Ludlow broke the news about this. Rivian revealed that they're pausing work on their factory in Georgia, which was actually the second biggest economic development project in the state's history. The governor there has really made that project kind of a keystone of the economic development work that his administration has done. Interestingly, we weren't sure what to expect from officials in Georgia yesterday when this news broke, but they kind of are showing some optimism that maybe this factory has a future ahead of it. They've said that Rivian has reaffirmed its commitment to the project, but obviously Rivian is looking to cut costs given some of its struggles, and so it's kind of said it suspended work on the factory for now, which obviously is a big disappointment in terms of the economic development implications for Georgia.
Yeah, wasn't this going to create like 7,500 jobs or something? Like this is going to be huge. So now what happens?
Yeah, well, I think now everyone in Georgia is kind of, I guess, waiting to see what happens. Rivian has until 2030 as part of this economic development agreement. They have until the end of 2030 to start meeting some of the commitments that they made as part of this deal. So that's certainly a lot more time. But I think in Georgia, there's concern, or depending on who you talk to, some people are cheerleading this step because not everyone was super excited about such a big project moving to their community. But it sounds like they have some time to start meeting the commitments that they laid out, which included 7,500 jobs, a $5 billion commitment, and those jobs were supposed to have a $56,000 average wage. So it definitely would have been, or it has the potential to still be a really meaningful project for the state from an economic development standpoint. But at the same time, even when this project was unveiled, there were always concerns about the size of the subsidies that Rivian was getting, which was about $1.5 billion in different formats.
All right, well, in the municipal new issue market, one of the marquee deals, or interesting deals to me at least, was our good friends at Harvard sold some bonds. Yes. Why is Harvard in the municipal bond market?
So Harvard's in the muni market, cities are in the muni market, states are in the muni. Everybody is kind of rushing to sell lately. Obviously, Harvard is seen as the smart money. So the reason they're doing this is, interest rates are very low. They actually sold corporate bonds. So they sold bonds into the corporate bond market. The corporate bond market is also seeing a huge surge in issuance. Part of it is because for issuers, interest rates have come down a lot in the muni market, so it's cheap to borrow. But at the same time, there's a lot more stability this year. Whereas last year, the market was constantly being whipsawed by economic data releases, Fed speak. This year, munis are much more stable. The tone has really improved. Muni funds are seeing more interest from investors. So on both sides, it's just a better outlook, both from lower rates and just more stability in terms of market tone and the investor community having a stronger footing this year.
So I make no bones about the fact that my muni knowledge is real thin. So forgive all of these basic questions. But I know that guys like Paul, who bought a house and are dying to refi as rates come down, is it the same thing in the muni market? If I'm a county and I raise money at 6%, if all of a sudden we get some Fed rate cuts and then I can reissue for 5%, is that a thing I can do?
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually a key part of muni sales. I will spare you the long story on this, but refis used to be a really big part of the muni market. With tax reform, it kind of went away, but now we're actually seeing some drama, which I'll get at, but now we're seeing rates come down to where refinancings are actually back in the money. The savings are good enough to make it worth the while for an issuer to refinance their debt, just like for a mortgage. But there's actually some kind of tension in the market that I wanted to talk about, which is based off a story yesterday that myself and my colleague Nick Corlo did. It's about the refinancing of debt that was sold in 2009, 2010 called Build America bonds. So those were taxable bonds, and they're being refinanced with tax exempt rates because that difference in yields is so significant at this point. But we're actually seeing some pushback to these deals from investors, just given that they are worried about losing money on them because they're being called away from the investors. Some of them bought at a pretty high price. And so Barclays today said that's actually one of the most interesting stories in the muni market right now, these refinancings that banks and issuers are excited about. For banks, it's new deals. It's a new chance on getting those fees. For issuers, it's a chance to save some money by refinancing your old debt. But for investors, they are not as jazzed about this type of debt refinancing that's coming to market this year. But even that, it depends on who you talk to. Some people don't seem to mind it as much, but it's one of the more interesting threads in the market right now.
But I mean, can an issuer refinance whenever they want, unless there's some language in the indenture that says they can't?
Exactly. It really depends. The muni market is so unique, diverse. Every bond deal is a little different. For each bond deal, the circumstances of when they can call back the bond can vary. That's why there's a very large and thriving community of bond lawyers out there that work on these deals. And I'm sure a lot of them are getting questions and working on these Build America bond refinancings. But it's very nuanced. It's one of those topics that if I write about it, I know that I'm going to be pulling up some bond docs and just kind of taking my time and trying to read the fine print. And that's part of the fun of munis in general.
All right, Amanda, let's get to the important stuff. Your UNC Tar Heels are going to come into Cameron Indoor Stadium Saturday evening to play my Duke Blue Devils. What's your prediction?
I think UNC has got it. They're going all the way.
Going all the way. Well, you guys, you beat us in the Dean Dome, but now you're coming into Cameron. That could be a different story here. So you're going to be watching?
I'll be watching for sure.
But you're going to be watching it from Kansas. They take their basketball pretty seriously in Kansas, don't they?
If I wear UNC gear here, people tend to weigh in. So, but we like to do that.
All right, Amanda. I'll be watching. You'll be watching. A lot of folks will be watching Duke, Carolina, Saturday night, 6:30 p.m. Amanda Albright, municipal bond finance reporter for Bloomberg News, joining us on Zoom from Kansas. I'll talk about the muni bond market issuance. I see in the notes, issuance is up pretty big this year, so that's pretty cool. So you survived another muni segment.
I did, but I totally checked out on sports.
You checked out on sports.
I was focusing, I was there, and then you brought up sports, and I was like, meow, meow, meow. I went to my total happy place. Now I don't know where we're going to go from here. But yeah, that was actually kind of interesting.
I thought it was interesting that, issuance is up 40% year to date in municipal bond market, so bankers are making money. Mixed in the market, boy, we've kind of given up those gains here. We got the S&P now off about 1/10 of 1%, and NASDAQ off 0.5%. But that jobs data today, again, the good news is that the month of February came in very strong, higher than expected, 275,000 jobs. But that revision downward from 353,000 to 229,000 last month. Kind of puts, fly in the ointment, if you will, there.
Yeah, but it also is a little bit of like, you see what you want to see.
Yes.
That it still just points to an economy that's just doing okay.
Yeah, it is.
But my question continues to be that if you get those 100 basis point cuts this year, what does that actually do to the economy? And was it Kashkari last week who was, or earlier this week, or was it Boston? Maybe it was maybe Kashkari, who was warning about this, that like you could sort of reinflate stuff, that there could be more exuberance. Is there pent-up demand? Like if I'm a company and all of a sudden there are cuts, am I like, cool, I'm going to produce more things?
Yep.
Maybe, and then that's a whole different bag of chips than we're expecting at the end of this year.
Yep, looking at the WIRP function, WIRP, the World Interest Rate Probability function, kind of got the June rate hike at about 70% probability, so that kind of leaped out pretty much over the course of the morning here after that data came out here. So for the full year, kind of factoring in maybe 4 rate hikes. We'll have to see how that goes. We started the year with predicting 6 rate hikes, so we'll see where we go. But again, kind of a strong job market out there, at least at the moment on the surface. Right now, with our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Paul, Alex, John, thank you very much. President Joe Biden delivered a spirited State of the Union speech before a joint session of Congress last night. Biden didn't call out former President Trump by name, but he did make references to his predecessor.
The issue facing our nation isn't how old we are, it's how old are our ideas. Hate, anger, revenge, retribution are the oldest of ideas. But you can't lead America with ancient ideas. It'll only take us back.
Delivering the Republican response to President Biden's State of the Union address, Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, speaking from her kitchen table in Montgomery, centered her remarks on issues she says are plaguing everyday Americans, like the border crisis and inflation.
The American dream has turned into a nightmare for so many families. The true, unvarnished state of our union begins and ends with this. Our families are hurting.
Britt is also calling out Biden's age, saying the free world deserves better than a dithering and diminished leader. The FDA made a sudden announcement this morning. You heard John talk about it earlier this morning, delaying the approval of a highly anticipated Alzheimer's drug. They instead convened a new panel outside for advisors. The FDA had been scheduled to make a decision this month on its approval of Eli Lilly's Alzheimer's drug, and now it could take several more months. Who are the highest paid actors in Hollywood? According to Forbes, number 1 is Adam Sandler. He made $73 million from his Netflix projects in 2023. Number 2, Margot Robbie. With her role in Barbie, she made $59 million on the highest grossing movie of the year. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
From the UK, and I'm the inventor of the gel razor. And today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the gel razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype, or manufacturing possibilities with investment, or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I developed the all-in-one. The idea is you pressurise the handle. The gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blades, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September. With copyright protection, I have a logo for the gel razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
For you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right. Thank you so much, John Tucker. You're listening to Bloomberg Intelligence. Happy Friday. We made it. I'm Alex Steele with Paul Sweeney and John Tucker. We're live here at our headquarters at Bloomberg in New York City in our Interactive Brokers studio. You can also check us out on YouTube. So let's get to sort of innovation, startups. How do you get it done? How do you start a business? What does it mean? How do you do it in the world of AI also?
other thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Google, Hershey's, Virgin, and a lot of challenger startups as well.
So, Sonny, what's I guess some of the types of work you're doing now with clients, and maybe how's that changed over the years?
Well, I think a lot of teams in particular are, navigating a very tricky landscape. And so a lot of our work is really focused on leadership alignment. Many teams with the advance of AI, with the way the world is evolving and changing so quickly, they need to adapt and be very agile. And so what we're often doing is we're coming in and working with visionary leadership teams to sort of help them align around what is it that they're fighting for, what is it that they're fighting against, what future are they trying to move the organization towards, and how do we get everybody to adopt that and really buy into that future, and most importantly, really not just anticipate it, but really be proactive in trying to move their businesses to that future so they can remain relevant and achieve resonance in this wild landscape that we're all in.
Do you feel like companies, Paul and I were in Newark at NJIT earlier in the week, do you feel like companies and the C-suite really understand the role of AI in their business and like have the right vocabulary, have the right strategy, have the right outward-facing stuff?
Yes and no. I think that leadership teams need to understand that AI is now part of the dominant conversation, and it is important to not only mobilize your team and understand the technology to become really fluent in the technology, but to adopt that technology company-wide. But I think it even goes higher up, right, with visionary leadership, which is what I really speak about and am an expert in, which is, how do visionary leaders help their teams not only see that future, but continue using these tools to sort of amplify it, to make efficiency greater, to just help them transform, to stay relevant and meet that new future.
Sonny, it used to be back in the day, if you wanted to build a brand, you just bought a 30-second spot on network television. Those days, I believe, are over. What are some of the successful ways or strategies that you've used with some of your clients?
Well, I think a lot of it is positioning, making sure that you have a very clear point of view. What do you stand for? What do you stand against? And more importantly, how do you get everybody, both your audience and your internal team, aligned to that? And then what is that sort of core story that you're trying to tell, and to remain that, to build that authenticity within the company? So you're trying to sort of have something to say, not just something to sell. And that's extraordinarily difficult when things are very competitive, when you have a lot of people in many businesses doing the same thing as you. What is going to define your competitive advantage? What is that cutting edge thing that you bring to the table? And how do you get people really excited about it? And how do you make it in a way that it's clear, it's compelling, it's articulate, and people want to be part of that dialogue? And so a lot of our work is really helping teams and organizations just define that. What is that big idea? What is that thing that you want people to rally around? And then how do we ultimately build that into the brand, into the mechanisms, into our ecosystem, into our language, into our brand's system, essentially, to get people really excited about that.
How did you get into this business? And how did you start your own company? What was that journey like?
Well, I was on track to be a veterinarian.
No
I was
kidding.
in college. And my partner and I dropped out of college in our early 20s to start Motto. And we had been moonlighting as designers on the side and just kind of fell in love with it and started to be hired for it. And so that was 2005. This is 18 years later, and now we've worked with some of the biggest brands on earth. And it's a labor of love because it's taught us like how to evolve with times. I mean, when we started, it was yellow pages and digital ads, basically printed materials, whereas now everything's digital and everything's, much, much more diverse. But back then, you had to really continue adapting every couple of years, and then also seeing organizations that you're working with also have to be agile and adapt. And your strategies and the way that you move teams forward is some of it remains the same. Values and authenticity will always be at the heart, I think, of every organization. You have to know what you stand for and what you don't. And ultimately, again, what is your competitive difference? What is your point of view in everything? And so as brands become more demanding of not only people demanding of, what do they feel about political issues? What do they feel about the issues of our time? You find organizations having to be and called upon to speak about these things, to really sort of plant their flags. And so that's why we call the company Motto, is because what is your flag? What flags are you planting so that people can understand who you are as a rallying call for who you are?
We only have like 20 seconds, but do you think if you had started this business today, you would have been able to do it? Like, has the environment just changed this much?
It has changed, but I think that would not have been. I think visionary leaders are driven by two things: innovation and progress. And I believe that if I had to start this business today, I would absolutely be able to. We would be able to do it because I think that if you are a visionary leader, you're able to understand and follow. You kind of move towards the trends and move your business towards that new future. So absolutely.
All right, Sunny. I mean, really. Starting my own business seems like the hardest, scariest thing in the world. All right, Sunny Bonella, co-founder and CEO at Motto. We super appreciate it. Kudos to you. That is quite a journey. Thank you for all of that perspective. It's like definitely not on my bucket list.
No, I learned that earlier on. I'm very good at just clicking coupons.
There we go. Yep. Back to muties. This is Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
Following, and let's start off with United Airlines Holdings and Boeing. One of their aircraft ran off the taxiway into a grassy area after landing at Houston today. This is the third incident this week involving the airline's Boeing planes. United Flight 2477 with 160 passengers and 6 crew had just landed at George Bush Intercontinental Airport at 8 local time when it veered into the grass on a turn. Nobody was hurt, fortunately. A Russian state-sponsored hacking group that stole sensitive data from Microsoft and their executives is trying to leverage that information to compromise the company's source code and internal systems. A hacking group Microsoft first identified, called Midnight Blizzard, had more unauthorized access than previously thought. The hackers, also called Cozy Bear, were previously caught accessing emails that belonged to senior leaders at the company. And HelloFresh's record 48% slump has left even the most bearish analysts dumbfounded prior to today's meltdown, sparked by disappointing profit guidance and the scrapping of 2025 targets. More than half of the 23 analysts covering the meal kit company carried a buy or an equivalent rating. It was once a pandemic darling. And Rivian Automotive halting plans to build that new multi-billion-dollar factory in Georgia. This is all an abrupt reversal aimed at cutting costs while the company prepares to launch a cheaper electric vehicle. Shifting planned production of the forthcoming R2 model to an existing facility in Illinois. That's going to allow Rivian to begin deliveries in the first half of 2026. And that's a look at some of the company news we're following.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. We made it. Paul is almost on the plane to his vacation. This is all a good happy Friday right now. So I'm Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Intelligence. We cover 2,000 companies, 130 industries all across the world. You can check us on YouTube and find us on radio as well. Let's go to Michael Barr now, though, for world and national news. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex. Paul. John, President Biden returns to the campaign trail today with an event planned in Philadelphia. He and former President Trump will hold dueling rallies in Georgia tomorrow. Last night, President Biden delivered a high-stakes State of the Union address, making his case for a second term. Biden went on the offensive on big issues like the border, the economy, and Roe v. Wade.
Those bragging about overturning Roe v. Wade have no clue about the power of women. But they found out when reproductive freedom was on the ballot. We won in 2022 and 2020, and we'll win again in 2024.
Senator Katie Britt delivered the official GOP response. The junior senator from Alabama slammed Biden on immigration policies.
President Biden's border policies are a disgrace. This crisis is despicable. And the truth is, it is almost entirely preventable.
Senator Britt used her kitchen as the backdrop. Parents in Uvalde, Texas are angered over a new report that clears the city's police of wrongdoing over their delayed actions during the 2022 elementary school shooting. At a packed council meeting, retired Detective Jesse Prado, hired by the city to investigate the deadly rampage, detailed multiple failures by law enforcement, but found that none of those officers violated policy. Kim Mata-Rubio, whose daughter Lexi was killed, and other families demanding the council still take action against the officers.
You said that it was best, that there was no way to go in. It was for their safety. It was not for the safety of children. How dare you?
The shootings killed 19 children and 2 teachers. Another Army soldier with top secret security clearance is being accused of revealing national defense information. In an indictment handed down by a federal grand jury, Corbin Schultz is accused of selling American military secrets to China. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, Alex, John.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Looking at Tesla, Wall Street, they've generally been split on Tesla, the analysts. If you're a tech analyst, if you approach this company as a tech company, you've been pounding the table since day one. If you're an auto analyst who follows this company, you've been cautious, if not downright bearish, because you just can't get used to the valuation. But Tesla's support among Wall Street bulls is weakening, with the lowest percentage of analysts since April 2021 recommending that investors buy the stock. The outlook for Elon Musk's electric car maker has been darkening rapidly this year as demand for EVs continued to decelerate. This week, the backdrop worsened further as data showed competition from other car companies in China is getting fiercer, and as production at Tesla's Germany factory was halted amid a disruption. As a result, just 20 of the 59 analysts covering Tesla have buy ratings on the stock, and one long-term bull, Morgan Stanley analyst Adam Jonas, thinks the company could even lose money in its auto business this year. So I remember Kevin Tynan saying, he's a BI auto analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, saying, at some point you got to start bending metal. And that's where we'll see kind of how this company performs, and that's kind of, partly where they are. But I just think the bigger issue for EVs, it's not necessarily a Tesla issue. It's more just what the end demand is for EVs in general. And that's kind of the challenge. We've seen Ford pull back, GM pull back, in some of their initial plans, or raise up their expected losses on their EV business in the short term. So it really goes to the ultimate demand, I think.
This kind of reminds me of what you were saying about Apple. We were talking about earlier in the show that, if you believe in the long-term EV story, which we all know, EVs are going to be a thing and they're going to stay a thing. It's just a matter of when that real adoption rate takes hold. Then okay, go ahead, buy in a dip. But until you get an inflection point, until everyone can deliver a good, well-priced EV. It's gonna isn't it kind of dead money for a little bit? I don't understand. I know, right? Until Paul Sweeney buys one, forget it.
Exactly right. All right, folks. Balance of Power with Joe Matthew. That starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Now it's time for the Road Show. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the Biden administration fans out across the country to reinforce the messages from the State of the Union. Which message will stick? We'll have more on that as the monthly jobs report brings both good news and bad for the president. We'll talk about today's data with Bloomberg's Molly Smith and insights from White House economic advisor Heather Boushey, as well analysis from our political panel this day after the speech. Kaylee Lyons will join us to go through the highlights along with Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg politics contributor, joined today by Maura Gillespie, Republican strategist and former advisor to House Speaker John Boehner. We're just getting started here on a Friday, and we do that, as always, with a look at Wall Street. For more on that, here's Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. Happy Friday, and we are looking at a down day right now for the S&P 500 index, very close to session lows. S&P right now tumbling by 6, down 0.1%. Dow Industrials holding on to a gain right now, up 81. That is an advance of 0.2%, while NASDAQ is down 58, a drop there of 0.4%. The 10-year yielding 4.08% with a 2-year at 4.47%. Spot gold today, right now we do have gold trading higher by 1.1%, up $22 the ounce to $21.82. Crude, a retreat there, down 0.9%, $78.24 for a barrel of WTI. And Bitcoin was trading above 70,000. Right now we got Bitcoin 67,943 on Bitcoin. Mixed data today on the labor market. Job growth top forecasts in February, but fell short of January's gain. The unemployment rate rose to a 2-year high of 3.9%. Administration reaction to the jobs report from acting U.S. Labor Secretary Julie Su.
When you look at overall the numbers, 275,000 jobs created, unemployment rate remains under 4%.
4%. We are continuing to see real wage growth. Now, the inflation numbers for this month have not come out yet, but all of those paint a picture of an economy that has recovered from the depths of the pandemic, in which almost 15 million jobs created since the president came into office. And I think, it's really just a good news story all around.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Talks podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. So again, recapping Jobs Friday, stocks trading mix right now. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 0.2%. NASDAQ down by 0.3. The S&P down 0.1%. Balance of power continues now. Once again, here's your host, wrapping up a very busy week, Joe Matthew.
Yeah, Charlie, thank you. It is still the same week somehow. Welcome to Friday. You made it to the threshold of the weekend. Some of us peeking out of one eye today, a little bleary after a very late night in Washington. Has the president left the room yet? Joe Biden, of course, with an hour-plus State of the Union address last night, followed by an hour-plus of glad-handing, back-slapping, and hugging. Point to prove. We brought it to you live here with special coverage, myself and Kaylee Lyons from Washington. Kaylee's going to drop by a little bit later. I think she's awake now, too. And we'll talk about what we learned last evening, and we'll play it to the panel as well. But the other big story we're following is, of course, jobs data this morning. And the timing here is key. What happens the day after the State of the Union is the start of the roadshow. Think of this as a Wall Street roadshow. Going to meet with all the analysts, right? Flout the stock. In this case, it's the message, largely Bidenomics, although we heard about more last night. Not just the president, who's on his way to Philadelphia today, but every member of the cabinet, surrogates from the Hill. They'll all be out making speeches and shaking hands to try to continue the message. And a big part of that message is the strength of the jobs market, even against the backdrop of continued and historic interest rate hikes. The headline on the terminal: jobless rate hits 2-year high even as hiring stays strong. Push and pull is the way the report was described to me when I walked into the Bureau this morning by our political director, Jody Schneider. Let's see if Molly Smith agrees. She writes the first take on the data when it hits the terminal, and she's with us now from World Headquarters in New York. Molly, it's great to see you, as always.
Good to
Are we
see you,
supposed to
Joe.
call this good news or bad news?
I hate to say it, but it's both. I know that's the mixed bag, the push and pull. I like the sound of that one too.
I get you.
Yeah, it's tough because here's the thing: the jobs report, without getting too technical, has 2 surveys, and they tell us different things. There's one survey that comes from businesses, and that's the big headline payrolls number that we saw, that advance of 275,000 jobs in February. We also get the pay data from that. We saw wage gains moderating. But then there's another survey. It's smaller. This one is just of households. And that's where you get the unemployment figures. And that's where the bad news came in. But we're going to have this story coming out on the terminal shortly showing that this wasn't really all bad reasons for unemployment to rise, which I know can sound weird, but we can talk a little bit more about it.
No, I think that's great. And by the way, thank you for stopping down. We always assume everybody knows what everyone's talking about here, and we throw jargon around on Bloomberg. That was a beautiful distillation of what we need to know here. Are you going to tell me now that the unemployment rate went up because more people are trying to get into the workforce?
I am going to tell you that. And
Okay,
it's
so we like that.
Yes, exactly. So this is exactly what I know. It's, again, when we talk about push and pull, there are things that are good news for the Fed, maybe not so good for the White House. The Fed wants to see more people coming into the workforce. We think of all of these labor shortages that we've been dealing with, the price increases that's led to. You have more people working, all else equal, that should help to alleviate this inflation. Of course, that depends if these people actually get a job, and that's what's still taking a little bit longer. So not all these people are immediately finding work, but the amount of people who are looking to come back into the labor force is rising, and that's a good thing.
Yep. We're hanging out with our buddy Molly Smith, Bloomberg economics editor, on today's jobs data. Talk to me about wages, Molly. This was really the number that they were looking at the White House with, of course, an eye on inflation.
Yeah, so their pay gains did moderate in the month. And again, that's not so great if you're hearing that as somebody who's earning the money right here. Of course, you want to see bigger pay raises, but that's the thing, right? There is this relationship between pay gains and price increases, and you don't want to get into this feedback loop where one can create, more stress in the other. So we've had such, for the last 2-3 years now, it's been such strong gains in pay that remember, pay isn't outright falling, it's just rising at a slower rate, which is what you'd want to see, and that's what's happening with inflation as well.
Yep, got it. Heather Boucher is going to join us in a couple of moments from the White House. They're going to be seizing on the upside that you talked about, increased participation, I suspect, and, of course, job creation itself. Payrolls is what we're going to hear about, right?
Yes. So, of course, I think what they're going to focus on, and rightfully so from their perspective, would be that the 275,000 advance in payrolls was above forecasts, and definitely a big number, and not exactly, yes, it's been slowing, but it's certainly not slowing down to a pace that would signal any alarm. But what she probably will not focus on, again, correct, from her perspective, would understand, is that the last 2 months of payrolls gains were revised lower, a lot lower. So that really took out a bit of the optimism around that the February figure, because the January one, if you remember, was so robust, and that one got marked down pretty significantly.
Yeah, the revision's another big part of the story today, Molly. You've had a busy morning. And
oh, yeah.
Awfully great to have you back, as always.
Thank
you have
so
to get up
much.
for an 8:30 indicator. Don't answer that. Molly Smith, Bloomberg Economics editor, with us from World Headquarters in New York, with the push and pull that this administration is feeling as they try to deliver the message. With me here in Washington now, who was, of course, with me last evening for our special global coverage of the State of the Union, is my pal and partner, Kaylee Lines. You emerged this morning. That's a start. That's in itself a
We're
success.
doing our best, Joe.
Absolutely. What a treat to share that with you last night. And I say this now because it's just us here on the radio and on YouTube, to be able to share that with somebody who appreciates the significance of the moment. And it was really something last evening here. I'm curious what you woke up taking away from it, because you get this 66-minute barrage of every issue and the laundry list and the whole thing. But there are a couple of moments that seemed lasting, and mostly in a good way for Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think we have to keep in mind that this speech was a State of the Union, sure, and it did include the laundry list of things this president thinks he has accomplished and this administration wants to tout, from drug pricing to the infrastructure bill, the way that that's showing up across the country. But it also was a campaign speech. And you and I, in the lead up to the speech yesterday, were talking about how, as much as this might be about policy, it was also about presentation. The idea that this president had to show up, look and sound strong, and show that he has the stamina and, frankly, mental capacity to deliver an address like this, not just to a joint session of Congress and everyone that was in the chamber last night, but to the American people. And when I woke up this morning, and, to some extent this week has just felt like a fever dream last night, could have just as easily been 2 weeks ago, but I thought, that really happened. And if I were waking up at the White House today, I might be feeling pretty good about how that went. This might be the best that the president could have performed relative to expectations, at least.
Yeah, and he managed the Marjorie Taylor Greene episode. It seemed to his benefit. She was waiting for him on the aisle. We did this in real time because we could all see the red MAGA hat, which incidentally breaks some rule of the House, I guess, which I assume has to do with campaigning. But the president's reaction has become a meme. When he first saw her, she gave him the pin, and he used it during the speech. This is the kind of moment they were hoping for when they were huddled around the table at Camp David.
Absolutely. I mean, he did say the name of Laken Riley. There was perhaps a misstep if you were listening on the progressive Democratic side when he referred to illegals, which isn't a term typically that they would prefer to hear from a Democratic president. But he did use that moment and frankly leaned back on his empathy as well, talking about how, as someone who has lost a child, he understands what her parents must be going through. And that was just kind of one of the interactive moments that we saw. I think Biden was trying to replicate what he did in last year's State of the Union when he kind of trapped Republicans into agreeing with him, not cutting Social Security and Medicare. He tried to do the same thing on everything from taxes was a big moment, and there were others as well. He was trying to play up that interaction and show off that he could do those ad-libbed real-time moments.
I'm kind of amazed that they gave him the chance, because Mike Johnson told the conference, don't go there this year. You saw what he did with it last year. Just sit quietly. And he sure did. We saw a couple eye rolls. That was about it. And we saw Lauren Boebert on her way in. She was quiet, I think, through the speech. Marjorie Taylor Greene was the one who couldn't resist it, though. We heard liar or lies shouted out a couple of times, a la Joe Wilson. And then when she got to the back and forth, say her name, she opened a door for the president. Remarkable stuff that you just kind of can't plan for.
Absolutely. And of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene was sitting in the chamber wearing a Make America Great Again hat, bright red. Certainly the president couldn't have missed her sitting in the seats. But that also speaks to the other big part of that speech, was drawing the contrast between himself and Donald Trump, who he never named. We just heard my predecessor a few times. And it was interesting that he decided to open the State of the Union talking about Ukraine and the threat from Russia and Vladimir Putin, but threats to democracy at home and January 6th. And I thought one of the money lines early on, you can't love your country only when you win, when he was talking about his predecessor.
There were some good lines, whomever wrote the speech. State of the Union, strong and getting stronger, I guess sort of stayed. He got obviously a round of applause from Democrats on that, but there was some real craftsmanship in the speech that I suspect will be unpacking for some time now. We'll get into Katie Britt a little bit later on when you come back as well, Kaylee. That was remarkable to watch it live and then to see it sliced up for social media, turned into memes before Saturday Night Live could even touch it. This is impassioned. A lot of folks felt like they were watching a performance.
Yeah, she was literally at her kitchen table, which I'm sure was meant to have some symbolism, kitchen table issues. She was trying to talk to mothers at home who might be dealing with the price of groceries, but also some darkness in the speech as it relates to issues of migrants, and gang rape was involved, and that was in some of the moments where people were talking about the way that she was emoting, and maybe it was a little bit up and down. I think we're going to be dissecting that and seeing those clips on social media for some time to come.
Absolutely, and we'll get into that with the panel a little bit later. So I'll catch you for hour two.
Indeed.
I'm glad you could pop in. We just had to make sure that Kaylee was still alive. We're all here present and accounted for, and I'm so lucky to be able to share this with Kaylee Lyons. She'll be back in less than an hour here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington as we continue our conversation about the jobs report. Of course, the economy loomed large in the speech last night. The president talking about how Americans are preparing to tell the greatest comeback story of all time, referring to the recovery from COVID and what he, of course, refers to as the expansion of the middle class. You add the jobs data today, and it's interesting. 275,000 blows the doors off from last month. We did get some downward revisions from prior months, though, and we have the jobless rate at a 2-year high. So as we talked about with Molly, this push-pull exists, and that's where we want to go with Heather Boushey as we now get the view directly from the White House. Of course, one of the president's nearest economic advisors, Heather Boushey, is on the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and it's great to see you live from the North Lawn. Heather, thank you for joining us, as always, today on Bloomberg. It looks like you've got two sides of the coin on this. Do you worry about the jobless rate at a 2-year high if it's caused by increased participation? Do you see that as a good thing?
Well, here's the thing. Let's remember that the unemployment rate has now been below 4% for a whopping 25 months. It's a record going back half a century. Yes, it did tick up this month, but we know that there's volatility in this data. And we know that when you look at the payroll survey, which is where we get that overall job gain number, we did see those 275,000 jobs far outpacing expectations and far higher than the pace that we need to sustain new entrants into the labor force, according to our analysis at the Council of Economic Advisors. So I think when you look at this report, it continues to be a strong report for American workers and American families, and showing these strong, steady job gains month after month after month. Let me add that one of the things in that report that I think is important to note is that the job gains were very widespread. 63% of firms added jobs last month, and that's higher than the pace, slightly higher than the pace that we were seeing pre-pandemic. So that is a good, healthy pace and a widespread dispersion of jobs being created across the economy. So I think that there's a lot to like in this report today.
I thought you would point to participation, and maybe you do want to talk about that yet, but I mean, this is something that we've been asking for and hoping for, increased labor participation. If it comes at the expense of a couple points on the unemployment rate, that's a good trade in your view, is it not?
Well, certainly we saw that uptick, and particularly for prime age workers. So that is unequivocal good news. It means that people are seeing that opportunity. They're coming back into the labor force. They're seeing that opportunity to get a job, and they're searching for that work. And again, what we saw in the payroll survey is that there was strong, steady hiring. And there aren't indications from other reports out there, from the job opening survey or from the unemployment insurance data, to indicate that there are real challenges in terms of people being, being able to find work. So I think that we continue to see that this is a good report. And of course, that higher labor force participation number, especially among women, is something that we like to see.
Well, tell me more about women. It's International Women's Day, and it's something that we're talking about throughout the day here on Bloomberg. We talked previously, Heather, about a potential problem at the beginning of this year that became known as the child care cliff. And I wonder if we're getting to the point now where we can actually see whether that has been realized.
Well, here's the thing. There's a few things that we know. First of all, we know that families need access to care services, to child care, and care for the aging and disabled in order to participate fully in the labor force. This is a known issue, and we saw that really bubbling up during the pandemic for so many families across the country. And of course, part of what the president did and Congress did was, put in supports for child care centers and for home and community-based care so that those services could be available for families. Now, we have seen that money paring back, and we haven't seen Congress extend it yet. We have been watching these numbers carefully to see what that does to especially caregivers who are disproportionately women, does to their labor force participation rates. So far, things are looking like women continue to participate in the labor force, but as the president said last night, this care agenda remains at top of mind for him. He talked last night about needing to make sure that everyone has access to safe and enriching and affordable childcare. He talked about making sure that folks have access to home and community-based services as well. So this remains a priority for him, and one of the core reasons is, the care itself is important, but it also, as you noted, Joe, it has these really important labor market implications.
Well, there's a lot to talk about here as we spend time with Heather Boushey, live from the White House here on Bloomberg. Our analysis from Bloomberg Economics, Heather, did point to some concern about the number of layoffs in this report. I'm just wondering if you're hearing from your contacts in the private sector if companies are starting to take a second look at headcounts.
Well, we are now, fully into this economic recovery. As you know, it was challenging to come out of the pandemic. Businesses got up and running. I think there's been questions germinating about how fast firms were hiring. Were they hoarding any workers given the challenges of, just this re-entry of so many firms? But I think what we continue to see, and I think that when you look at the report in its full scope today, what you continue to see is a strong labor market, and again, an unemployment rate below 4%. This is low. It does mean that if you are out there and you're searching for a job, or you're on the sidelines and you want to get work, there's a lot of jobs that remain open and available to you, and we continue to create those jobs, making sure that as we pull out of, as we continue to see this recovery and we see that shifting from the production of goods to services, we are going to see some shifting across, where people are working. But I think that these numbers really do indicate the strength and the ongoing foundational strength in this job market recovery.
Heather, the president coming off his State of the Union address, of course, and he talked about the need for higher taxes on the wealthy and on corporations, specific to the idea of a higher corporate tax rate, which I know is something that he's been pushing for some time, and we have seen some movement there. I just wonder what impact that might have on hiring, if any at all. Is that something that you're able to model?
Well, here's the thing. We need to make sure that the federal government has the resources that it needs to be able to do the things that it needs to do. And one of the priorities that the president is focused on is making sure that the Internal Revenue Service has the resources they need to literally enforce the laws on the books, let alone the new ideas that the president is bringing to the table. We are already seeing the success of that, as the IRS has been able to, get back money from taxpayers who owed it. And these are taxpayers at the very top end of the income ladder. I think that what we have seen in the economic research, what we've seen in our lived experience over the past couple of years, is that businesses have a lot of resources. We've also given them a lot of subsidies and supports to go out there and invest. So we're seeing this investment boom at the same time that we've been focusing on making sure that we're enforcing the laws and raising taxes on, as the president likes to say, wealth and not work. So I remain convinced that, if government has the resources that they need to do their job and businesses focus on investing in those industries that are so important to American competitiveness and American jobs and workers, we will continue to see that kind of economic growth.
Did you help write that portion of the speech, Heather?
You know, this is we all work on the president's issues and support him in every way we can.
Was there a watch party last night? I need to know. I know Jared Bernstein. I saw him walk in, but were the economic advisors huddled together in the OEOB watching the address?
There was a team of us. I believe I tweeted a photo about this. We were there watching together, cheering the president on, and also so excited for all of our colleagues. It was amazing last night to see the diversity of the president's cabinet there supporting him, who are every day implementing his Investing in America agenda, and quite wonderful to see Chair Bernstein out there as well.
Well, I'm remiss. I need to get to Twitter here, obviously. Lastly, Heather Boucher, always generous with your time. When you step back and look at this, you have to answer questions from people like me once a month when the jobs data is released, I should say. But when you step back, you look back a couple of years here, and you consider the historic series of interest rate hikes by this Federal Reserve, are you perplexed by the strength of this job market? They've tried to smash it with everything they have, Heather, and I don't want you to comment on the Fed. Just the pure strength of the job market right now, it seems historic.
I think what the lesson I take from it is that fiscal policy needs to play its role. The president came out with a bold, decisive agenda to make sure that the fiscal side, not just the monetary side, did its job to get people back to work and make those investments that would create jobs all across the country. I think what this recovery has shown is that we need to focus more on making sure that those automatic stabilizers are ready to go, that we are making those investments when we need them most, when you have those economic downturns, so that communities aren't left behind, because that provides the foundational strength upon which new businesses can start. The president talked about it last night. 3 years of record-breaking numbers of new business startups, allowing people to upgrade their jobs over the past couple of years, allowing people to find work. And then on top of that, the Investing in America agenda that is crowding in all of these private sector investments. That's where the strength of this recovery is. The smart fiscal policy, the strategic investments, and making sure throughout all of this that we're empowering workers and that markets are fair and competitive. So the answer is quite clear.
Yeah, and connecting the dots here when it comes to polling is another matter that we've talked about, Heather, and we'll continue that conversation. You're always kind of join us here on Bloomberg. Heather Boucher with the White House Council of Economic Advisors. It is true, although we have seen some uptick in the numbers. The Wall Street Journal survey for Joe Biden and Donald Trump that came out about a week ago showed a near 50% number. I'd have to go back and find that, but it was the highest we had seen, up 10 points from the month earlier on those who were feeling better about their economic prospects. But boy, there's a long way to go there. And it's still a big question about whether they can pull off a soft landing. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Glad you're with us here on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. You can find us right now. If you get to YouTube, search Bloomberg Global News. As we continue to unpack the big speech from last night, we brought it to you live from Statuary Hall. Of course, the president was in the chamber with the members, but we had a lot of great conversations with lawmakers in the hall as they emerged. And we're still trying to gauge the impact of a lot of what we heard. I was fascinated, as a lot of folks were, by the order in which the president tackled topics last night. You would have thought he'd come out swinging on the economy or the border first, right? Both of them waited. The president started on Ukraine as the Swedish prime minister looked down from the First Lady's box, and that's where we want to start our conversation with Jenny Welch, of course, advising Bloomberg Economics on all things geopolitics. Great to see you. Formerly, of course, of the Biden administration, and you have a good sense of what went into that speech last night. Were you amazed that he started with geopolitics with such a raging debate over domestic policy?
Yeah, no, I think it was a really interesting move, and I think it underscores the amount of urgency that the administration feels on Ukraine. Mm-hmm. The last shipment of U.S. military aid was back in December. Funding since has run out. Ukraine, now entering the third year of the war, is low on ammunition. Russia seems to have gained the initiative, and I think that's part of the reason why he raised it first. But yes, in a speech that is normally mostly about domestic and especially economic policy, I think it was an interesting move, and again, underscores the priority the administration's attaching to this issue.
So the national security team must have been high-fiving. They got their priorities into that speech pretty well. In your experience, how much time and how many people go into whatever package you deliver to the speechwriters to say, look, this is the message from our wing of the administration?
So much time, so many people, so many rounds of coordination. And I think the point to really underscore there is, again, this is really usually a bulk of it is a domestic policy speech. And so that's where a lot of the attention goes, and that's where a lot of the hands involved in writing it are. But it is literally getting edited right up until the moment that the president delivers it. I think President Biden mentioned that he was still going to be making some tweaks to it, and we saw him almost improving or ad-libbing parts of it when he diverted from, I think, what were his prepared remarks to, for example, have a little bit of engagement with the audience, with Congress.
So this doesn't move the needle, I'm guessing, in terms of one speech. But if the State of the Union doesn't, the Super Bowl of politics, what does? I saw Mike Johnson walk out of the chamber last night with his head down. He did a couple of interviews, maybe one on Fox, and then he was out. I saw him take his jacket on a hanger and walk out of the building. Does he come back to work today with any different feeling about Ukraine?
I think there's two different audiences that the president was trying to reach last night. And the most important audience for him was actually American voters, and in particular undecideds or folks who aren't quite sure if Biden's their candidate in November. That's really who he was reaching out to. Congress was, of course, the direct audience for the speech, but I think the president recognizes the odds of Congress passing major legislation on issues, especially like immigration, border security, when we are already effectively in an election season, are pretty low. So I think what he was trying to do is actually more reach out to voters, convince them that his policies are working for them, and the odds of actually getting Congress to move on any of the things that he mentioned beyond the necessary government funding, I think are actually quite low.
So this is kind of a slow burn then. He spends the next 6 months traveling the country, getting people to call their members, I guess is the potential outcome that he's hoping for here. But boy, I mean, Ukraine doesn't have that kind of time, does it?
And Ukraine might be somewhat of a separate issue. There might be more room to move on that, although, again, House Republicans are saying they want to take up border and immigration. It seems unlikely they'll want to do that when it's seen as a political victory for Biden. Perhaps they will eventually get to the point where they'd be willing to separate the two. Again, I just think that the odds that they'll move with any major way on border and immigration security are low. I'd love to be surprised on that. That, though, still leaves room for the executive branch to take its own actions. There's things in particular in Ukraine that could be done. It would just be costly. For example, there's some reporting to suggest the Biden administration might consider moving additional arms out of U.S. stocks, even though it doesn't have the ability to replenish them right now.
Wow. Well, we've talked a lot about the defense industrial base with you and the lack of manufacturing bandwidth that we have to not only make our own weapons, but help others. That's what this $60 billion would have gone for in the supplemental request for Ukraine, a lot of it at least. You know, it strikes me, the president has called out oil companies to produce more. Go do more is the message. Can he not say that to defense contractors? Why does that have to involve tens of billions of dollars on Capitol Hill? It's the same argument, right? The patriotic move is to crank up the factory. We need more stuff.
It's a fair question because that's how it operates in most industries. But with the defense industry, they actually don't usually start production or investment in a production line until there's an existing contract, including with the U.S. military. That's their biggest customer, but even with foreign partners. So they need a buyer. They need a buyer in order to actually start the work.
Oil company
they're
always
not
has
just
a
going to
buyer.
have like stuff on the shelf to
Then
sell.
again, we're asking oil companies to drill, produce more, and they just watch prices go down as a result. That's kind of a double standard, isn't it?
I think it's just about the contracting process and really the historic relationship between the U.S. government and our defense industry, right? The defense industry really exists and revolves around the U.S. military. Yes, they sell to other foreign buyers, but really most of their focus is on what the U.S. military needs. This is what President Eisenhower was worried about when it comes to the military-industrial complex, and we can have many conversations about all the inefficiencies in it, including this issue of they don't start production or investment in a production line until contract exists.
So we need it.
And it can take years for something to get on contract.
It's amazing. I'm fascinated by the whole thing, and I know you've spent a career on this, which is why I have to ask you about it when you come see us. There's more here, of course, with Israel and Taiwan, but I want to ask you specifically with regard to the Middle East. The president did confirm Bloomberg reporting that this port, or what he referred to as a temporary pier, would be put in place to deliver aid to Gaza. How do we make that work? He says U.S. troops will not be on the ground. How do you do it then?
I think there's a lot of questions and details that still remain to be fleshed out, or at least publicly, about what this will involve, because certainly someone needs to be on the other side of that pier operating the aid deliveries. The European Union said this morning that they're already working on sending a package of relief to Gaza that it seems like will be part of this aid corridor, and that UAE is part of this project as well. I think one of the other things that it really underscores is the Biden administration recognizing there is growing international concern about famine in Gaza, especially in the wake of last week's deadly incident where over 100 people were killed trying to secure aid. And earlier today, the news that 5 people were killed by a package that parachute didn't deploy. So there's a real urgent need to get aid in there. And unfortunately, ground convoys have been delayed, they get robbed, and the aid doesn't get to the people who need it. So I think this is somewhat of a desperate or an act of desperation to get aid into a very desperate situation.
We'd love to talk to you more about that when we learn more. I must be punchy today. I'm lacking sleep after last night, as I'm reminded constantly that I work with the smartest people in the business here at Bloomberg. Thank you, Jenny Welch, for the great analysis. We're going to assemble the panel next. We've got a lot to talk about with them this day after the State of the Union, and certainly headlines from around the world. Let's start there with Amy Morris right now. She brings us up to date from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Thanks. The U.S. jobless rate climbed to a 2-year high in February, even as hiring remains healthy, pointing to a cooler and resilient labor market. Acting U.S. Labor Secretary Julie Su spoke to Anne-Marie Hordern on Bloomberg Television after that report came out.
The jobs numbers continue to be very strong. The 3-month average is actually 265,000. So, we look at trends as much as we look at monthly numbers. And our overtime figures demonstrate strong, steady, continued growth. Exactly what we want to see. It feels like the very definition of a soft landing.
Acting U.S. Labor Secretary Julie Su tells Bloomberg manufacturing in the U.S. is just taking off and that there's more work to do. President Biden makes his case for a second term during his State of the Union, frequently criticizing his predecessor, Donald Trump. Brown University political science professor Wendy Schiller tells Bloomberg the president used his speech to energize Democrats.
He picked a fight with the Republicans pretty much right off the bat. This was about the Democratic base. This speech was entirely directed at energizing the Democratic base and convincing them that he's perfectly capable of making the argument against Donald Trump, whose name he didn't use during the speech, and the Republican Party.
Brown University political science professor Wendy Schiller. President Biden did say in the State of the Union that he ordered the military to create a temporary port on the Gaza coast and used his speech to call on Israel to let in more aid. U.S. officials say it could still take weeks to build that facility. The European Union, along with its partners, including the U.S., are set to launch a maritime aid corridor to Gaza as soon as this weekend. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Jobs Friday. We're looking at a mixed market right now. Dow remains higher. The S&P, NASDAQ, both in the red, with the S&P down 5 right now, lower by 0.1%. Dow Industrials up 98, a gain right now of 0.25%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is lower by 61, a drop there of 0.4%. 10-year 4.08% with a 2-year 4.49%. We do have spot gold today trading higher, up 1.3%, 21.88 on gold, while West Texas Intermediate crude is down 1.2%, WTI at 77.99 a barrel. Job growth topped Wall Street forecasts in February, but that tally did fall short of January's payroll gain, while the unemployment rate edged higher. And with more, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
If the trend persists, the Federal Reserve will have room to cut interest rates soon. Employers added 275,000 jobs, still a respectable showing. Unemployment hit 3.9%, a 2-year high. Now, some of that increase in unemployment is quirky due to people joining the labor force. Footnote: February's payroll gain, though below January, tops last year's monthly average. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And reaction to the jobs report, administration reaction from Heather Boucher, a member of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, who was interviewed moments ago right here on Balance of Power.
So I think when you look at this report, it continues to be a strong report for American workers and American families, and showing these strong, steady job gains month after month after month.
Hear more of the conversation on the Balance of Power podcast. So again, recapping, stocks are mixed, with the S&P up 0.3%. Right now, we've got the S&P actually down 0.1%. It's the Dow that is higher now by 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington once again. Your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, we thank you. As always, we'll get back to Charlie in a little bit. Keep you posted on Friday trading here, as we do every day on Balance of Power. Our colleague in New York has always got his eyes on the market and the subway. We have to bring in the panel after last night. I don't know if Jeannie got some sleep, because it was a late one. Of course, Jeannie Shanzana was part of our special coverage for the State of the Union, with a lot of questions I have this morning. You know, you got to sleep on this stuff sometimes. And of course, the Katie Britt response was so late that beyond the memes I've seen on Twitter this morning, I'm curious to hear what both of our panelists think. Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst, joined today by Maura Gillespie of Blue Stack Strategies. Now remember, Maura used to work for the Speaker of the House, a man named John Boehner, and has a good sense of what went into that evening. It's great to have both of you with us here. Welcome to the day after, Jeannie. You're a trooper, first of all, and happy International Women's Day to both of you. What are the takeaways other than energy that matter, Jeannie? Because the headlines are all the same. Look at the one on the terminal. Biden turns up heat on Trump. We're hearing about his energy levels. Brian Stile told us after the speech that Joe Biden was yelling in the room. Did they clear the bar that they had raised?
I do think they cleared the bar, and thank you, Joe, for the kind words, and happy International Women's Day to Maura as well. I do think they cleared the bar. I think the question going forward is, can he sustain it? And can he continue to build on the momentum? We heard from many Democrats who had low expectations, were deeply concerned, and we've heard from all the polls, including Bloomberg's own poll, of these critical states, that voters are feeling like Joe Biden is simply too old to do the job, as we know. And last night, he did put some of those fears to rest. But again, it's a question of sustaining it. But I think in terms of another theme beyond energy, the one I think is maybe even equally or more important is contrast. And I thought that's where Joe Biden did an equally good, if not better job, contrasting his vision with that of his opponent and driving that home. So I think those two things are the theme. And then moving away from Biden, I think a third theme as where have we gotten with the State of the Union? It seems a little bit more cabaret than serious politics that we had come to expect. And I think that's troubling to me as a political scientist.
It's a lot of cabaret. It did turn into a call and response a couple times there, which Maura, I don't think that's what Mike Johnson wanted. He reportedly told his conference to not give Joe Biden the opportunity. Don't take the bait. And here you have him yelling back and forth with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'll ask you about the Republican response in a moment, Maura, but do you agree with what appears to be the broad analysis, at least in the mainstream media, that the president helped himself last night by displaying energy and some spunk?
I do. Real quickly, I will say happy International Women's Day back at you, Jeannie, and thank you, Joe. But yes, I think the president, if the goal was to show that he is fired up and ready to run again and serve as president for another 4 years, then sure. I think if that was the goal, great. I think if the goal was to address some of the major issues that are concerning American families and voters, I don't know that that was the takeaway. But I do think that he achieved the goal of being on his toes, again, responding to people in real time. I don't know that that's the best way of using his State of the Union, which, again, to Jeannie's point, it has certainly devolved in years past. For some members who saw it as a campaign speech, of course it was a campaign speech. You have a unique situation where we have a rematch of the 2020 matchup, and Trump in 2020 also used his State of the Union as a campaign speech, right? He was running against Joe Biden at the time. So it's not too surprising. It just is a sad state of affairs that this is how something historic and supposed to be above the fray, has turned into this.
Jeannie, the money line in the speech every year, right? The state of our union is, and you come up with your descriptor. He went actually, it was pretty old fashioned. The state of our union is strong and getting stronger, he said. Full-throated on the microphone. Do we really believe that, Jeannie? Does this union feel strong? We talk about division in this country every day, not only down the middle of the country, but within the factions. Is our union strong and getting stronger?
I think it depends on, number one, who you talk to and what aspect of the union you're talking about. And I think most presidents, putting Gerald Ford as an exception because he famously said, we're in trouble. Right. That's not the line you want to go out with. So they've learned, and they all say it's strong, getting stronger, some verbiage like that. But to your point, we know, looking at the levels of discontent in this country, that there are enormous challenges and rough roads ahead. I mean, I look frequently at the Pew poll, for instance. Trust amongst Americans is at the lowest point it's been in 50 or more years. A full 0.75% of Americans say they can't trust the federal government. And that is not specific to Joe Biden. It has been getting worse for decades. So it is a far more global problem than we like to talk about. So from that perspective and many others, it's not a good sign. But Joe Biden, of course, is up there like every president who is running and every president who is serving, trying to inspire Americans to keep moving forward. And of course, he used that line, and, can't begrudge him that. What else would he say unless he was Gerald Ford?
Yeah. Well, that's right. I just, we need to have a reality check from time to time here, and you're always good for that. Jeannie, Maura, enter Katie Britt. It was late. I don't know what kind of rating she got last night. It was after 11 o'clock, if I remember correctly, by the time she delivered the official Republican response. A lot of people are learning about the speech on social media, where, frankly, it's become a meme. Her performative approach, whether you thought she was acting or not, didn't land authentically with some people. Maura, how did it land with you?
Exactly, like I said, not authentic. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for voters, for people who watched it. She's unfortunately getting, ridiculed on Twitter, X, and the social media landscape. But because her prep video, her, social media post before she went on was looking forward to talking with you all, looking forward to giving the Republican rebuttal.
It was normal.
That was normal. That was Katie Britt. The reason she got elected was because she was relatable. She was authentically herself. And then you flip, not even however many minutes later, you're watching her sitting in the kitchen. I just don't think, in a barren kitchen, I don't know where she was sitting, but it just didn't come across well. And she was very theatrical and not who she is. I mean, it didn't come across genuine. And I think that that's such a disservice. I obviously sat there as a staffer thinking, like, who thought that this was a good placement for her? How many times did they practice this? Did they go over these certain delivery lines and these facial expressions? Did they talk about this with her? I had all those questions. So I was worried for her. Yeah, for sure.
It remains the political Wheaties box, the cursed response to the State of the Union. D's and R's. We'll have more with the panel next on Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
With Larry Culp tonight, 6 p.m. on Bloomberg Radio and Television. Eli Lilly shares are trading lower. Lilly down 2.4%. Its Alzheimer's disease drug is going to face further delays in gaining approval. And those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pelletin. This is Bloomberg.
This is Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Keely Lines on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
One of the highlights or lowlights, depending on how you watch this stuff of the State of the Union address last evening, was the appearance of George Santos. People say, what? I thought he got fired. They let him in the building, and the answer is yes, they have to. It's part of being a member of the club. Even after you leave, you still get floor privileges. So he was walking around the building like he owned the place last night, only to find out that he wasn't just there to get on camera, and surely that was part of it. He's running for election. He sends this long tweet while he was there saying that he'll be running for the seat in New York 1. Now, he was just booted from the seat in New York 3, and a lot of people are wondering what exactly he's thinking of, so the panel might have some answers here. Jeannie Shanzano, of course, obsessed with all things George Santos in her home state of New York, is with us, Democratic analyst and Bloomberg Politics contributor. We're also joined today by Maura Gillespie, Blue Stack Strategies Republican strategist. Jeannie, I'm starting with you as the hometown girl on this one. Is this real?
You know, it's as real as anything with Santos is. And, you know, Joe, I was hoping you too would come with your rhinestone collar and silver shoes today. He certainly likes to make a splash at the State of the Union. Somebody reminded me, and I had forgotten about his back and forth with Mitt Romney last year. I can't imagine what Mitt Romney was thinking this year when he waltzed in. He does say he is running. Nick LaLota probably doesn't have that much to fear. But the reality is, I think it's time for Congress to change the rule. I know you can be barred if you're convicted of a crime. Maybe now, if you're expelled from Congress, you shouldn't have floor privileges anymore.
Are we going to see debates in this race, Maura? Is this for TMZ? What's about to happen in New York?
Well, I'm curious if he's even, started the process of running against Lolito, because who in that district is signing his, getting the signatures out for him? So I'm curious as if he just wanted to announce it and just say he was, or, what kind of polling he took to say, like, oh, I have a viable chance here. Or again, it was just for attention, which I'm guessing it is just for the cameras. So I don't know that there's a real strategy here. I think it was just, I have this privilege. No one's taken away from me yet. They haven't figured out how to since it's been so long since we've expelled a member of Congress. So I'm going to capitalize on it. That was, I think, the most thought that went into this process.
Well, I'll tell you, the tweet says here, I look forward to debating him, referring to Rep. LaLota, on the issues And on his weak record as a Republican, the fight for our majority is imperative for the survival of the country. God bless you all. We are off to the races. How does he build a staff, Jeannie? Who would work for him?
You know, they did before. I don't think they will again, but you never know. And you know, you and Maura keep talking as if he's worried about these things, polling staff, all these things. I don't get the sense he's worried much about any of this stuff that you guys think he is. You know, he's, probably just telling people he's graduated from law school, medical school, and he's ready to go. And so he's going to jump right in. I can't figure it out.
Well, it's going to be something to behold. I suspect Mr. Lalota did respond, by the way, quote, "I look forward to debating him on the issues and his weak record as a Republican." Sorry, that was coming from Santos. Lalota says that he will look forward to dispatching him in the election, and we'll obviously see how that goes. Maura, he's not going to win the seat in Congress, is he?
No, there's no chance that he gets back to Congress. But again, I think this display on the House floor on State of the Union, it just was another unfortunate sign of the devolving state of our decorum at the State of the Union, and in respect for the institution itself. It's been sad to watch as somebody who worked at the House for over a decade and had immense respect for that building. Still have respect for it, obviously. But it's hard to watch members or former members who just don't understand.
I can't imagine what goes through your mind at times like these. The quote from Lalota: "If finishing the job requires beating him in a primary, count me in." So I guess it's on. Our panel is back in hour 2. Kaylee Lyons is coming in as well. Hour 2 starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Joe Biden is on his way back to Philly. Welcome to the fastest show in politics, as the president and his cabinet spread out across the country this day after the State of the Union to reinforce the messages delivered in the speech last night. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Kaylee Lyons this day after the Super Bowl of politics. Kaylee, President will be wheels up shortly. He's going to be in 5 different cities over the next 5 days.
Yep, he'll be in Pennsylvania today, and then he's going to go from there next week to Georgia, New Hampshire, Michigan, and Wisconsin. A lot of swing states on this list, Joe, as if we're viewing last night's speech as really the effective big launch of his general election campaign, and he is full steam ahead on the grand tour in the aftermath.
That's for sure. This is the drill, right? You dispatch the surrogates. The cabinet will be out there. It's not just the president. They're going to be hitting cities around the country to try to get some kind of momentum coming off the speech here. The administration, we're going to talk to Josh Wingrove about this at the White House, reporting for Bloomberg, is feeling pretty good today, Kaylee. We touched this a little bit earlier. They feel like they cleared the bar that they intentionally raised for this president.
Yeah, the White House, and specifically the White House Chief of Staff, promised an energetic president last night, and we got over an hour of Biden, by all appearances, looking pretty energetic. Not many gaffes to be seen, even some ad-libbing. Did go on some engagement with members of Congress, specifically Marjorie Taylor Greene. And of course, there was also the Republican response that posed an interesting contrast to the president. We'll get into that more this hour. Also, some of the policy the president was outlining, changing to taxes, also talking about the deficit reduction he says already has come under his administration, how much more he would like to see. And that's what we're going to get into with Maya McGinnis of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget.
Happy International Women's Day.
Also that. Thank you, Joe.
You'll be hearing voices from some very smart ladies over the course of the next hour, including our political panel, so a lot to follow here.
And you also hear the smart voice, as always, of Charlie Pellet, who has a check on the markets for us from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kayla Lyons. Right now, we have got the Dow just turning negative. In fact, at the low of the day right now, the S&P also at the low. A lot of red on the screen. This Jobs Friday. Right to the numbers with the S&P down 25 now at 51.32 on the S&P. That is a drop of 0.5%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dipping into the red, down 18, drop now of just under 0.1%, while the Nasdaq Composite Composite Index is down 153 points. For NASDAQ, a drop of 1%. 10-year 4.08% with a 2-year 4.48%. Spot gold today trading higher, up 1%, $21.80 for an ounce of the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1.3%, $77.92 for a barrel of WTI. Cannot ignore Bitcoin, was trading briefly above 70,000 today. Right now, Bitcoin 68,390. Bitcoin up today by 1.6%. After last night's earnings report, shares of Broadcom down 7.3%. Broadcom is predicting that AI spending will fuel growth more quickly than expected this year, even as sluggish demand in other areas weighs on semiconductor sales. So again, we've got Broadcom down now by 7.2%. Recapping, stocks move into the red. Down Friday, S&P right now down 27, down 0.5%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Welcome back live from Washington on Bloomberg TV and radio, where, of course, we are all in the aftermath of the State of the Union. And there was a question last night about what was going to happen after the president's speech, not just to his campaign, but also whether or not the Senate was going to be taking a vote to avert a government shutdown that could partially start at midnight tonight. They still got to do that to get out of town, but it raises the question of spending. And it's worth pointing out, Joe, that we're still sorting out and trying to get across the finish line appropriation bills for this fiscal year. And on Monday, the president is going to deliver to Congress his budget for the next fiscal year.
Weren't they marking up a 2025 bill yesterday? And that was, I don't get how any... Look, we're going to talk to Maya McGinnis must be rolling over this whole thing. Maura, of course, will be on our panel. She's rolling too. There's just no path, it seems, to land this second minibus, but we'll get there. March 22nd is the new date on the calendar that we're looking at, right? We asked Dick Durbin after the speech last night, you going to vote on this tonight? He said no, tomorrow. That was the end.
Now tomorrow
they have
is
to
today.
get through some rules and get some things done
Amendments,
before that happens, right?
Yes.
All the while, on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, I think it's fair to say they were popping corks after the speech last night. They huddled for the weekend, a long one at Camp David. And as you've been hearing over the course, and maybe you saw it or heard it here in our special coverage on Bloomberg, the president seemed to exceed expectations. And we want to bring in Josh Wingrove, a Bloomberg White House reporter who's with us right now on the North Lawn, basking in the glow, I can only assume. Josh, what are you hearing from the administration? Because it seemed like after the chief of staff, Jeff Zients, raised the bar, the president jumped over it.
Yeah, Democrats are pretty happy with the president's performance last night, including members of Congress. And, you know, this seems like it'll quell some of those really brewing questions, nerves, basically, among Democrats about whether Joe Biden should be the standard bearer. Of course, it wasn't really clear that that was ever going to make much of a difference anyway, because the process is pretty advanced right now, and there was just no sign that anyone would be looking to, you know, mount a serious challenge to him. But the question for Biden all along has really been a question of energy, his energy, but also the energy of his party. His voter base is wider than Trump's, but just not as enthusiastic. And so the whole question of this election cycle is going to be like, can Joe Biden and can Democrats get people to the polls? So if anything, I think yesterday Biden gave Democratic voters, as well as Congress people who are going out to sort of, you know, drag people to the polls when they can, you know, an argument to try to do that. And that really is the whole ball game for them. And so we'll see this sort of travel schedule, key swing states, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin. You talked about that as they go to try to shore that up. You know, of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the latest Bloomberg Morning Consult poll showing that Joe Biden right now is an underdog. Donald Trump leading in all 7 swing states we're tracking.
Yeah, and 8 of 10 voters in those swing states viewing Biden as too old. And I wonder if any of those minds changed based on the president's performance last night. But aside from the performance, Josh, there also is the policy. And we did get some policy proposals from him that are relevant, especially to our Bloomberg television and radio audiences in regard to taxes. Higher taxes on billionaires, on stock buybacks, 28% corporate tax rate. Should we expect all of that and more to be showing up in what he's going to deliver to Congress on Monday?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll hear more about that on Monday. Also, of course, I'd note the increase in the corporate minimum tax. That was a new one from him as well. And there were some littler nuggets, too, like getting rid of title insurance on federally backed mortgages. That sort of falls, I guess, generally under the Biden junk fees effort. But he sort of had the makings of his re-election platform there. The big one of the big stakes of the 2024 election is that 2025 is going to be a year where Washington's going to be talking about tax reform. Some of the provisions of those Trump tax cuts expire. The question will be, does anyone want to do anything about that or not? So Joe Biden is sort of staking out his lane on that, and that lane is consistent with where they've been before, right? Biden has always said no taxes on people making no tax increases on people making under 400 grand. Of course, then that if they want to raise more revenue, which this White House does, that means they're taxing corporations and higher earners and the wealthy instead to try to make up that gap and shrink the deficit. We'll be looking, of course, at the projections in that budget as well. We reported this week that there was a bit of wrangling in the White House on this question about how to set the projections, in particular the interest rate projection, and that Lael Brainerd, the NEC director, pressed for a lower rate in a meeting where those rates are typically set by a group that does not include the NEC directors. So a bit of palace intrigue on that. So we'll be watching for that on Monday as well, what those numbers look like.
What's the intrigue around the border right now, Josh? There was a lot of pressure for Joe Biden to do something or maybe announce an executive action last night. Did we get his answer past the bill that the Senate passed?
We did. They've been batting away these questions of what, executive authority. Conservatives want him to use so-called Section 212F powers. The administration says basically that's not a tree we want to bark up, because if those powers do exist, and not a lot of people are really sure, it's sort of a surefire legal challenge. So he's saying essentially, I'm the one that wants to pass the bill. Republicans are the one that don't want to pass the bill, and he's trying to sort of do that backflip, of course, because for the last couple of years, Republicans have been the ones calling for something and Democrats haven't. But one of the gaffes from last night also was on this question. It was interesting. Marjorie Taylor Greene was asking him to address the case of a woman killed by a migrant, and Biden did talk about it, and then he referred to the migrant in question as an illegal. He's getting pushback from Democratic members of Congress right now who don't like that word for describing people of undocumented status, even people who've been accused of murder.
He seemed to make use of that prop pretty well, even if the language caused people to bristle. You look like Clark Kent on the North Lawn, Josh Wingrove.
Well, you put a string
Except he wished he had a voice like that, Kaylee.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
All right, Josh, thanks for joining us after what was a very long evening from the White House. We appreciate your time. And now we want to go to someone else who I'm sure was listening to the speech. Maya McGinnis, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget President, is joining us now. Maya, first and foremost, happy International Women's Day. Thank you for joining us on this day of all days. And it's worth pointing out that the president last night, when he was talking about some of his economic policy, he said he has been delivering real results in fiscally responsible ways. To what extent is that true?
Yeah, he made a number of claims on fiscal policy, and I guess I'll start by saying it's good he was even talking about it. Every time we go into a State of the Union, we're sitting there wondering, is someone even going to mention the near record levels of debt we have? That said, he had quite a mixed bag of how honest the different claims he made were. The first one he talked about is something he's done before. He took credit for reducing the deficit and said that he'd reduced the deficit by more than $1 trillion between 2021, 2022, when the deficit came down. That one is absolutely false, in that the deficit did come down because our huge amount of spending for COVID was running off. And if you look at actually the policies the president put in place, he overall made that situation worse. So no, he doesn't get credit for reducing that deficit. Second thing he said was that he had signed into law legislation that reduced the deficit by another $1 trillion. That one's true. The Fiscal Responsibility Act will bring the debt trajectory down by $1 to $2 trillion if we stick with it. But it's fair to say that was really originated with Republicans, and that the Biden administration kind of came along kicking and screaming, but we're seeing that will generate real savings. Two other big things he said: that the Trump administration had added huge amounts to the debt. Absolutely. $8.4 trillion signed into law during the Trump administration. That is a record level. And the last thing was some big accusations of Republicans on Social Security, wanting to cut benefits. I don't know a single politician who's talking about cutting benefits for current retirees. I'll tell you, two politicians who are not talking about fixing the program, which we absolutely must do, are both Biden and Trump. And unfortunately, this election is shaping up to be one where nobody's talking honestly about Social Security. And hopefully that will change, or that's going to leave the people who depend on it awfully vulnerable.
The lockbox will stay locked for now, Maya. I hate to sound like a broken record because I always feel like I have to ask you this, but revenue did come up last night, a new swing at a minimum corporate tax, higher taxes on the wealthy, a minimum billionaires tax, as he called it. Is that music to the committee?
Absolutely. We are sort of policy neutral and pro-deficit reduction. So anybody from any end of the ideological spectrum who's putting forth things that would reduce the deficit at a time when we're at near record levels, interest payments are bigger than defense. I could go on and on about why we have to. Absolutely, that's the right thing to do. What I do worry about is pretending we can fix this whole problem by taxing millionaires and billionaires. That's not how it's going to work. We have to cut spending. We have to fix Social Security and Medicare. There are going to be middle-class revenue increases when we finally get serious about this. So great to talk about things that you would do to make a difference, but you can only tax millionaires and billionaires so much. And I worry when people, it's like waste, fraud, and abuse. Like, we should do it, but it's not going to fix the problem on its own. We're going to have to go a lot farther. But I think that will be the big piece of their budget that will lead to deficit reduction because of the large taxes they will put in place in the budget.
Well, what else would you like to see in that budget, if not on the revenue raising side, on the actual spending side, keeping in mind that it is today that we do expect the Senate is going to pass the first 6 bill megabus? We're going with megabus, Joe?
But let's do it.
The
you
bus.
And I will call it a megabus.
The first bus. We're still waiting on the second bus by March 22nd, at which point we'll be, 8 days shy of being halfway through this fiscal year, Maya? So when we're thinking about spending and just, A, the dysfunction around getting spending bills done, but B, the trajectory of spending, how dissatisfied are you with what you're seeing?
Yeah, well, I guess it's a kind of a medium bus, and I'm totally dissatisfied with this process. The fact that we're still working on last year's budget. The House put out a budget. Its budget committee put out a budget yesterday. The Senate Budget Committee never even put out a budget last year. But the House did it before the president did, which is the wrong order. No one takes the budget seriously. The process is a disaster. But you're asking me to lay out the hard things that our politicians aren't going to talk about. What should we actually do? And so here we go. The Fiscal Responsibility Act, right? First step, we do have to put caps on discretionary spending. That is going to help keep the huge growth in that area of the budget down, but it's really the least of our worries. So we quickly have to turn to mandatory spending. Social Security goes insolvent in 10 years. We need to look at whether we should slow the growth of benefits for people who don't need them so we can preserve them for people who do. Should we, for younger workers, look at raising the retirement age? Yes, the answer is yes. And should we talk about lifting the payroll tax cap so you pay higher than the cap right now? Absolutely. All of those things are going to need to be employed to fix Social Security. Also, probably changing the way we evaluate inflation and maybe bumping up a minimum benefit. We need massive cost savings in healthcare. There are a lot of ideas of ways we can do that before they even have to affect beneficiaries, ways to have savings in the system. We should look through that. National security, there's so many things we can do that will lead to more savings. That said, it's a rough time in the world right now, and my suspicion is that any savings we can generate will ultimately have to be plowed back into all of the hot spots around the world, cybersecurity, AI, all these different things. And we're going to need more revenues. Like I said, it's not just at the high end, it's not just corporations. We're going to have to talk about broader taxes, whether it's a carbon tax or getting rid of the almost $2 trillion in tax breaks we have every single year. That's a good one because you can raise a lot of revenues that actually wouldn't necessarily harm economic growth. But just my main point is, with that laundry list that no politician will say, is we got to get real. We got to stop promising what we're not going to do. Our debt is growing faster than our economy. It leaves us really vulnerable. And I just wish we could start this discussion in earnest because none of these things are easy and all of them are going to have to be looked at.
I can only imagine what lawmakers say when you're alone, Maya, about this issue. I'm guessing they agree with everything you're saying, and then they show up for work, and we kick the can again. With the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, the president, of course, Maya McGinnis. We always learn something when we spend time with you, Maya. Thanks for being with us here on Bloomberg. The Senate moves today, as you mentioned, Kaylee. Then we do it all over again. We come back next week for the second half.
The 22nd. We technically have 2 weeks now to figure out the next
You'd like to
6
think they
bills.
might work on it next week.
Well, one would think. They typically run it right up to the deadline in this Congress. But yes, it's going to be a fun 2 weeks
She
because
said
this week
medium
wasn't
bus?
enough. Medium bus.
You go so there's a mini bus, medium bus, omnibus
They're all buses.
on Bloomberg.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A choppy trading session. The Dow has been fluctuating between gains and losses. Right now back in the red. We have got the Dow down 12, drop there of less than 0.1%. S&P moving lower by 25, on track for a losing week, down 0.5%. While the Nasdaq Composite Index is down 162, a drop right now of 1%. Stocks edge lower after a rally that drove the market to multiple records this year. Traders weighing mixed jobs data. The 10-year yield 4.08% with a 2-year 4.48%. Spot gold now up 0.8%, 21,078 on gold. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.2%, 77.97 a barrel. Bitcoin, big story there, was trading above 70,000 briefly. Right now, Bitcoin up 2% at 68,640 on Bitcoin. Tesla's support among Wall Street bulls is weakening with the lowest lowest percentage of analysts since April of 2021 recommending that investors buy the stock. Just 20 of the 59 analysts covering Tesla have buy ratings on the stock. Tesla today lower by another 1.5%. Again, recapping, S&P down 25 now, a drop of 0.5%. Balance of power continues on this Jobs Friday. Back we go to Washington, and once again, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
Charlie Pellet, thank you. I have to mention breaking news before we assemble our panel and get back into the State of the Union address last night. We're still picking up the pieces from the big night on Capitol Hill as the president makes his way to Philadelphia today to start the road show. Headline crossing the terminal, courtesy the Associated Press. Third-party movement, no labels, says it will field a presidential ticket. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Live from Washington, this is exactly what they said they were going to do. They said it on this program. If we get through Super Tuesday, and these are the two, Trump and Biden, we're running a candidate. The problem is they don't have one.
Right. It's happening. We just don't know who it's happening with. We have no idea what this unity ticket is actually going to bring, who's going to be on it. We just know who's not, because there are many people who have ruled themselves out. Joe Manchin, Mitt Romney, Larry Hogan, he's running for Senate in Maryland, even Kirsten Sinema. So who's
no Nikki, no Dean
left?
Phillips.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's not a politician. Look, we'll find out on this one. I don't know how they're going to get on the ballot across the country either. But when you talk about unity ticket, you know, we heard something that seemed new last night.
Unity agenda.
Unity agenda. How did that hit you in the speech? Is that part of the new stump speech?
Well, I perked up and thought, is this it?
Yeah.
Is this going to be one of
the
the
new
mottos
tagline?
of the campaign? And I did wonder when he said that if he was talking about, you know, unity within his own party, unity between the U.S. and our allies, unity of trying to bridge the divide between Democrats and Republicans, also keeping in mind that President Biden was making this speech after receiving the knowledge that Nikki Haley had left the presidential race, that meant Trump was likely who he was going to be facing in November, and that they both were going to have to vie to bring Nikki Haley voters into the fold. And how much of his speech last night was aimed at that Nikki Haley voter and trying to bring them onto his side?
I know who to ask.
You do?
Let's bring in the panel. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst, joined today by Maura Gillespie at BlueStack Strategies, Republican strategist who spent time working for the Speaker of the House when John Boehner held the gavel. It's great to have you both with us here. Maura, your thoughts on that? Because I think I know where Kaylee is going here, as the president used the word illegal when he was talking about an undocumented immigrant after he was goaded in that direction by Marjorie Taylor Greene. There were other moments as well last evening when he might not have sounded like a progressive, in fact, upset some members of his own conference. I was talking about this earlier with Kaylee in the newsroom. Is that by design?
I do think so. I think that when I heard those words, you know, unity, I was wondering would he reach out to the Nikki Haley voters in that moment, but also harkening back to what he ran on was bringing the country together after chaos and, you know, maybe restoring that kind of messaging, you know, last night. I don't know that it was as effective as maybe he had hoped or his team had hoped, but he did hit on a couple of themes that would appeal to Nikki Haley voters, talking about and having, you know, obviously Sweden there after the news about them joining NATO, having them there in the box next to the First Lady, Jill Biden. So that was an effective tool, reminding people of the important role we have in a foreign policy and having a strong foreign policy and standing up against Putin and against Russia. But also the IVF conversation, I thought was definitely a nod to not only his party, but also to Nikki Haley voters. She has been pretty outspoken on the outdated ways that Republicans talk about abortion and just really women's health in general, talking about taking, you know, women's personal freedom away. So she really, you know, he really did hit on that, I think, and appealing to Nikki voters for sure.
Well, and Jeannie, he did so without actually saying the word abortion. He skipped over that. He was just talking about reproductive rights. And I guess this gets at the same question. Do you think that was by design, and do you think it will prove effective?
Yeah, it definitely was by design. I mean, as we all know, Joe Biden is a Catholic. He has, you know, said many times that he personally is opposed to abortion, but he supports a woman's right to choose. And even beyond that, I think politically, the reality is is that Americans, whether you're conservative, liberal, or anywhere in between, liberty is critically important. Freedom is critically important. And they are right to couch this as the freedom for a woman, a person, to make this decision with their doctor. And that decision doesn't just have to be about abortion. It can be about reproductive rights overall. It can be about taking contraception. It could be about who you're going to marry. And that's the point he's trying to make about Dobbs, is that that decision opened a can of worms, according to many Americans, that the states have walked through in limiting our freedoms, and he is promising to restore those.
Well, even in the Republicans' response delivered by a senator from Alabama, where IVF has definitely come to the forefront of thought after the Supreme Court ruling there, Senator Katie Britt did talk about IVF and the importance of protecting that. She also, though, talked about a lot of other things, and as I'm sure we have all seen on social media, her speech in its entirety has been chopped up into some remarkable pieces. But one thing she really did try to draw a contrast with what President Biden said 40 minutes into his speech, finally getting to the issue of the border and immigration, was that very issue. Here is just a taste of what she had to say after the president's address.
President Biden's border policies are a disgrace. This crisis is despicable. And the truth is, it is almost entirely preventable.
Just, you could hear there and even see to some extent the degree to which she was emoting during this speech last night. And Maura, I would love to get your reaction. This is Senator Katie Britt, the youngest ever Republican woman elected to that body. She is just 42 years old. She's pretty popular, serves on McConnell's leadership team. Did the rising star rise to the occasion?
No, and I'm disappointed because I had high hopes for her. And again, I think that she just wasn't authentically herself. It was very theatrical and overly emotive to the point where it's not actually helpful. To not take away from the stories, unfortunately, because what she was talking about is a real issue. And I don't think that President Biden hit on this at all really enough last night in his speech, not taking responsibility and giving us forward action about what's going to happen at the border. I think he really missed the mark there. And she could have capitalized on that in a more impactful way had she not been so, really just a little bit all over the place, going from smiling to sad to angry. She really went through it in a matter of 10 seconds at a time. So it was hard to take it seriously. And that's disappointing considering the fact that we have really, really grave concerns about the crisis at the border, and families are struggling to understand how something that happened, to Larkin Riley is not, being addressed right this second.
I'll tell you, you think back, Jeannie, when was the last successful response to a State of the Union? Either party. You've got to go back in time. I was racking my brain. Everyone's showing images of Marco Rubio with the water bottle and Bobby Jindal and the foyer of the mansion. Maybe it was Governor Bob McDonnell of Virginia, and of course he ran into some problems in his career after that, but he followed Barack Obama with pretty strong optics, what looked like him speaking to the General Assembly. Maybe that was I'll have to think more about it, but I need your take on this, Jeannie. She's sitting in the kitchen. This is clearly something that was scripted way in advance. She rehearsed it a lot of times. Did it work for anyone?
I think it possibly could have worked for the base of the Republican Party. And, that is the challenge here, is that so many of us looked at that speech, and putting aside the content of what she said, which I obviously had problems with, the way in which she presented seemed just not in keeping with who she is and who she has become politically, which is a young, vibrant, respected, smart woman who became the youngest senator in, the country. She has really made a mark. And you didn't see that last night as they placed her in a kitchen the night before International Women's Day and had her, some people described as, looking like a forlorn housewife, going between laughing and weeping very, very quickly. And it just wasn't authentic to who she is. And to your point, Joe, it's been a really, really difficult speech for people to give. I agree with you, Bob McDonnell, probably the most effective. When this started in the 60s, it was, people just speaking in the opposition, sort of like boring old senators and members speaking out. And then in the, 80s, 90s, they tried to make it a little more dramatic. It is not working. They must go back to boring because they have lost their way on this speech. And it is really the death knell. And in many cases for young, promising public officials. And that is frustrating to so many of us who want to see these people succeed.
Maura, we have less than a minute left, but to Jeannie's point about the idea of her being in a kitchen, and I understand the point she's making on the housewife thing, but it also was her literally sitting at a kitchen table talking about kitchen table issues, right? She was talking about the price of groceries, about immigration, which we know is top of mind for voters. This is the playbook that Republicans will be using as they are competing on the ballot in the lead up to November, right?
It didn't look like she was sitting at the kitchen table. It looked like she was placed in the kitchen. So I don't think that her team did a really good job of that aspect. They could have made that a little more clear, maybe had her background be like the living room or something and show that she was actually at a home in a kitchen table. They could have done it differently. But yes, it does optically not make me, as a Republican woman, pretty happy to see that because I do think that it sends the wrong message. And for somebody like Katie Britt, who could be a rising star in the Republican Party, last night was just not good for her or her future, quite frankly.
All right, Maura Gillespie and Jeannie Shanzano, thank you both so much for joining us, our political panel on this day after the State of the Union and International Women's Day. We appreciate it. And now we want to head over to Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom with a check on world and national news. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Kaylee, President Biden laid out his vision for the nation as he heads into another general election campaign, opening his third State of the Union address last night, warning of threats to democracy both at home and abroad, citing the war in Ukraine and January 6th rioters. He never mentioned his political rival, Donald Trump, by name and referred to his predecessor, accusing him of running a campaign of revenge and retribution. Donald Trump, meanwhile, secured a more than $91 million bond to delay executing the verdict in the defamation lawsuit against him while he appeals. He also filed a notice of appeal in the case, asking the court to put that verdict on hold. And the third-party presidential movement No Labels has decided to field a presidential candidate in the 2024 election. No Labels is not expected to name its presidential and vice presidential nominees today. Come up with that later. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
From the UK, and I'm the inventor of the gel razor. And today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the gel razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype or manufacturing possibilities with investment or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I did all in one. The idea is you pressurise the handle, the gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blades, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September with copyright protection. I have a logo for the gel razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
0.9%, 21.79 right now on gold, and West Texas Intermediate crude is down 1.5%. WTI right now 77.73 a barrel. Gap shares are trading higher after reporting fourth quarter earnings that exceeded expectations, a sign that efforts to turn the apparel retailer around are bearing fruit. Gap shares up now by 3.4%. Bottom line, stocks lower across the board right now. Lows of the day with the S&P down now by 0.7%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington, and once again, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio, live from Washington, where it is post-State of the Union Day, but it is also, Joe, Jobs Day, and especially for a president who made the economy one of the real immediate features of this speech. It was what, the third subject he brought up in his address last night, the strength of the economy. We know this administration has continually touted an unemployment rate that has remained 4% for a stretch of time we haven't seen going back decades, and yet we're right there, according to this month's jobs report, 3.9%. Unemployment higher than expected, still below that 4% threshold, but that's not exactly the direction the administration is probably cheering.
2-year high, right? On that metric. We spoke earlier with Heather Boucher from the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, and she's pointing to participation. More people get into the workforce, you know how this goes, and they're suddenly counted, and because they're looking, it can give you a bit of a false impression. But we got a lot of layoffs in that number too. So, you can look at this a couple of different ways. If you're the Biden administration, you see a stronger than expected job market. It's as simple as that, though.
Sure, you
Whether
look at the
it stays that
headline
way.
figure for this month, maybe not the revisions for the month prior. As always, you can pick your narrative and run with it, and that's how politics works. It's all spin.
Well, for sure. Although, look, stronger than expected payrolls. We'll take that at its face here. I don't know. David Weston is with us from New York because push and pull is how it was being described earlier by Jody Schneider, our political director. Molly Smith went with that good news, bad news look here, David. But when you step back, of course, our friend, the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week, and you think about what predictions were, what Elizabeth Warren might have been saying would happen to the job market following this historic run of interest rate hikes, this thing continues to defy gravity. It looks like it's indestructible in some months, doesn't it?
Well, I think that's exactly right. If you remember last week, I asked Mary Daly, given where the economy is, despite all your rate hikes, why are you talking about cutting rates? And I think, if anything, this sort of confirms what we heard from Jay Powell in his 2 days of testimony this week, which is he'd rather wait for the data. There's nothing I see in these data that really demonstrates he must go one way or the other. I think it keeps optionality for the Federal Reserve, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's actually going to be the inflation data of next week that might be more directive in terms of what it's likely to mean for the Federal Reserve. We got CPI coming up on Tuesday, PPI coming up on Wednesday. It never ends, does it, David? Nor does the Fed speak, except for when they're in the quiet period. We ought to parse through it all.
Yeah, and it's my impression right now is on the CPI, as well as all the other indicators that they have, is it's coming down, but it's not coming down that fast. They're not coming down to 2% yet, which is what Jay Powell keeps saying is still his intention. He wants to get it down to 2%. He doesn't back off that number, and I don't think we're there yet.
Wall Street Week, of course, follows Balance of Power coming up at 6 o'clock, and we talk every week with David about what we're going to learn here. This is all baked into the conversation, the political conversation here in Washington, David, as the president starts the roadshow now. His cabinet is following him, making the argument for Bidenomics as we try to figure out what's next for the Fed. Is the job for Joe Biden in the year ahead? How are you guys tackling this?
Well, we do try to talk to everybody we can about what exactly the difference could be. In fact, we had Mark Malloch Brown, who's the former Deputy UN Secretary General, on to talk about, from a foreign policy point of view, what difference it could make. And we talked to everybody what difference it could make, really not knowing fully what difference it would make. But I keep hearing from people, part of the concern is the sort of populist strain that goes both through Donald Trump and Joe Biden's theory when it comes to things like trade, for example, and protectionism, that there may not be that much of a difference. And the big issue is you don't hear much about the deficit. Even as the interest rates have gone up, you don't hear much about that. Neither side seems to want to tackle that. We just talked to Larry Summers just a few minutes ago, and he said he thinks that early on in the next administration, who's ever that is, somebody's going to have to start dealing with the fiscal situation, that it's going to get pressing.
Well, David, we actually had a conversation on that earlier this hour with Maya McGinnis of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, who did a little bit of fact-checking for us of what exactly was factual and not in the President's State of the Union last night when it comes to deficit reduction and what is going to be required to really do that in a more material way going forward as we await his budget on Monday. But of course, this Friday is not just Jobs Day or State of the Union debrief day. It also is International Women's Day. To what extent are you featuring that on Wall Street Week tonight, David?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because we do have Sally Krawcheck, a name well known to Wall Street, has had various very senior positions. She's now founder and CEO of Elevest. And they came out with a survey, actually, just this week about a major wealth transfer, not just in the United States, but globally, that will be going from men to women, as frankly, Kaylee, some of us guys die off, and the women inherit the money, and what that will mean, actually, in investment. But we also asked her specifically about women, or the lack thereof, at senior levels on Wall Street. It's a bit better than it was, but certainly not where it should be. And this is part of what Sally had to say.
It's gotten better. It hasn't gotten better enough when you consider that women are 51% of the population. It's inertia. An object in motion stays in motion, an object at rest stays at rest. But it's truly important, and it's truly important beyond the, gee, I wish there were a handful of women who get to senior roles and do well. Good, yes, that matters. What really matters is that financial services is, of course, the lifeblood of our economy. And the research shows you that diversity is a driver of superior performance. That homogeneity, conversely, means you trust each other too much, you take on more risk, thinking subprime crisis here, right? When you don't have that diversity of thought, perspective, background. So we should all care about diversity in financial services because it is, again, the lifeblood of the economy. And we should also care because if we are a woman, we want to be reflected. If we're fathers and we have daughters, we want them to be reflected. And the industry, needs to do and will do with more diversity a better job for women, again, who are coming into a ton of money with the great wealth transfer.
Yeah, it struck me as a terribly important point. I'll go back 30 years ago now at Capital Cities, and Tom Murphy was the chair, and we went out to a management retreat out in Arizona we had every year with the top 100 or so managers. He looked around the room, there weren't very many women. He came back and said, we're leaving half the brains in the world behind. That doesn't make sense for us just to be a good business. And he really undertook some extraordinary efforts to make sure we got some women into senior ranks at Cap Cities just to make better decisions.
Yeah, well, that makes a heck of a lot of sense, David. And I think the point here is that it's not only the right thing to do, it's the profitable thing to do. When we start talking about diversity, whether it's gender diversity or otherwise, she makes a great point. This actually enhances the product and the bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. And when you talk about that major wealth transfer, one of the points she made that I'd never thought of before is a lot of these families where there have been a couple and the man's made a lot of money, the woman's made a lot of money, they've put it together. The advisors speak to the husband and not to the wife. And when the husband dies, the wife has no particular relationship with the advisor, and she typically takes all the money and just puts it in a bank because she hasn't been dealing with a financial advisor, something I'd never heard of before. She said it's a major problem in financial advice.
I will say, Kaylee, I do know what that's like when you sit down with a financial advisor for the first time and they inform you that you're going to die a decade before your wife. It is an eye-opener. David Weston, great to have you, as always, the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week. He'll be, of course, following Balance of Power here on Bloomberg Radio and TV. I've come to grips with that, by the way. It's probably for the best.
It's got dark.
It is, yeah.
We'll have more fun coming up, I promise.
No one's going to die on this program, beginning with me. And Kaylee, this is Bloomberg.
listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Thanks for being with us on the fastest show in politics with Donald Trump news dropping, legal news dropping today. Kaylee, this is important. We were waiting for word on this payment in the E. Jean Carroll case, $83 million. He's posting bond to cover more than that.
Yeah, you have to post 110%. If you're not paying it outright, the bond has to be greater. So the bond is to the tune of $91.6 million. And that just speaks to the idea, Joe, that as the former president is mounting a presidential election campaign and a multi-front legal battle from criminal and civil cases, this is pretty expensive stuff. Perhaps if there's good news for the former president, it is that his picks to lead the RNC, now that Ronna McDaniel has departed, Michael Whatley and Lara Trump are the new chair and co-chair. It's official today, and that may open up those resources for him to tap, at least in certain cases.
Yeah, I guess in that case, the transition is complete at the RNC in the likeness of Donald Trump, and something that we'll be hearing a lot about here. Ronna McDaniel has left the building. It's a new RNC.
It is indeed.
We need to find out what the implications, though, are of this update in the E. Jean Carroll case. And Eric Larson joins us, Bloomberg legal reporter from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York. Eric, it's great to see you. I guess we answered the question about whether Donald Trump has the money. What can you tell us?
Well, for now, yes. He had a deadline of Monday to either post or either pay E. Jean Carroll the $83 million or post this bond to try to put it on hold during his appeal. By the way, a judge still has to approve this bond, so that'll probably happen next week. But, he has this much bigger bond that he has to arrange in the next couple of weeks. So that's an even bigger question there. But for now, this does answer the question about this $83 million issue. He has it. We don't exactly know what he put up as collateral for the bond, whether it was a cash or real estate or both, but there it is.
Well, and I think the other case you're referring to, of course, is the other civil case related to the Trump organization, where he has now been ordered to pay because of interest that has piled up more than $400 million in the case that the New York AG, Letitia James, brought. How does he get together that bond? Do we have any idea how hard it was for him to get this $91 million bond together? And then you got to, quadruple that for next time?
Right. So the total judgment against Trump in the New York Attorney General's civil fraud case is $454 million. He's going to have to post 110%, at least, maybe 120% of that to put it on hold during the appeal. And we know that even just in this smaller appeal in the E. Jean Carroll case, that bond, he had some trouble there because he told the judge he wanted to delay the E. Jean Carroll bond for the same reasons he wanted to delay the other one. He had problems, putting together a bond, the cost of it, using his properties as collateral. These were things he did not want to do. Obviously, he went ahead and did that anyway. But he has testified in a sworn deposition last year that he had around $400 million in cash. Bloomberg Billionaires Index estimates he has $600 million altogether in liquid assets. So you can see that these combined verdicts automatically take up all of his cash and perhaps all of his liquid assets. So any surety company, those are the companies that arrange these bonds, are going to be looking pretty closely at what collateral he has and what the exact value is to make sure that they aren't at risk by posting these bonds.
Remarkable stuff as we spend time with Eric Larson in our remaining moments here on Balance of Power. March 25th, we'll all be watching New York for the start of the Stormy Daniels trial. Eric, will that actually begin as expected, or does he have any other lever to delay?
That trial is happening March 25th. It is starting. There's nothing that can stop it now. And it's going to last 6, perhaps 7 weeks. Stormy Daniels, as I say, she might actually be a witness. She might testify. It's also possible Trump might testify. It's going to be a really fascinating case. Obviously, we'll be hearing from his former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen. He's going to be one of the star witnesses in the case, again, like he was in the New York Attorney General trial. So a lot of the same cast of characters here. But first criminal trial for Trump, first criminal trial for a former president is going to be unprecedented.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric Larson, Bloomberg legal reporter, thank you so much for joining us from New York. And as we talk about the criminal trial that I guess will begin in just a few weeks' time in New York, there do remain a lot of questions about the fate of his other trials, including the election subversion trials, like the one here in Washington brought by Jack Smith, related to the former president's actions leading up to and on January 6, 2021. And while President Biden in his State of the Union address last night did not directly speak to Trump's legal challenges or name Trump himself, just refer to him as my predecessor, he did, though, within just the first few minutes, talk about January 6th.
That's for sure. Interesting. Before the economy, before the border.
Way before the border.
We got to insurrection, which I guess says a lot, but we're looking at April 25th now, correct, for arguments before the Supreme Court?
Yes, in the immunity question in that
Exactly, which would
case.
allow, or not, that Jack Smith trial to move forward. So we're not there yet. We've got about a month and a half before we find out if that trial will even be allowed to go back on the calendar, and at that point, no indication on where on the calendar it will fall. So the question remains, will it happen possibly before the election?
Yeah, so we don't really know what the future holds in that regard, but we do know what the future holds here on Bloomberg Television and Radio, because coming up just about a minute from now is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic. Carol, what you got on the show this afternoon?
We have a great guest coming up. We're going to do a deep dive with Kathy Wood of ARK Invest, of course, the founder, the CEO, the CIO. Wow. We have so much to talk about.
Amazing.
Macro, market, NVIDIA, some other names. We're looking forward to spending a bunch of time with her.
I'm guessing Tesla might come up after this weird run lately.
It may come up.
Yeah,
Yes, indeed.
she was selling Coinbase last time I was reading about it. I can't wait. What time is she on, Carol?
She's coming up in just about 3 minutes. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
You guys say goodbye. We say hello to Kathy.
We do say goodbye. Yeah, give her our best, and our best to Tim Stenovic. Of course, you guys have a great weekend after the program. Kaylee, I'll meet you at 5 on Balance of Power. Bloomberg Business Week starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. Live on Bloomberg Radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenovic. Let's get to the setup on this Friday, International Women's Day. We've got, of course, a market that is well off its highs at this hour. We've got a mixed jobs report, Tim, and I think investors trying to kind of work their way through it all.
Yeah, we did see record highs on the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100 earlier before stocks dropped back. Traders, though, betting that the Fed will start cutting rates in June. We're going to dive into all that and more with a special guest coming up in just a couple minutes.
That's right. In just a moment, we're going to talk with ARK Invest, Kathy Wood, everything from the jobs report, really the macroeconomic, the macro market environment, and what she says has been one of the biggest mistakes in monetary policy history. So we've got a lot to unpack with her. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the flows into her spot Bitcoin ETF, some of what she's been buying, what she's been selling. Our deep dive coming your way, everybody, in just a moment.
Plus, more on the U.S. employment picture. We're going to be joined by Amy Glazer, Senior Vice President at the global staffing company Adecco. And Carol, I don't know if you have any spring break plans.
No, I'm going to be working.
Yeah, so will I. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that later in the program and what's going on in Florida when it comes to spring break.
All right, everybody, let's get a check on that trade and your top business stories. Here is Charlie Fellett.
Thank you very much. Jobs Friday, lows of the day right now with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index all declining. Right now we are looking at a 30-point drop in the S&P 500 index, down 0.6%. Stocks are retreating after a rally that drove the market to multiple records this year. Traders weighing mixed jobs data. We've got the Dow down 37 now, down by about 0.1%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 168, a drop right now of 1%. The 10-year 4.08% with the 2-year 4.47%. Spot gold up 0.7%, 2,175 on gold. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.5%. $77.76 a barrel. Bitcoin, quite the story there, was trading briefly above $70,000 today. Bitcoin now up by 1.9%, and Bitcoin currently at 68,618. Broadcom is predicting that AI spending will fuel growth more quickly than expected this year, even as sluggish demand in other areas weigh on semiconductor sales. Today, Broadcom shares after earnings, they are down by 5.9%. So again, recapping, stocks lower across the board. S&P right now down 28, a drop there of 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, so appreciate it. Charlie Pellet there. Well, it is International Women's Day, and with us, a recognized, much talked about and followed individual, well-known investor who also happens to be a woman, and safe to say the person who ignited the investment thesis around the innovative and disruptive theme and economy just about 10 years ago. So let's get to our interview. Great to have back with us Cathie Wood. She's the founder, CEO, and CIO of ARK Invest, and she joins us once again from St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Cathie, so great to be talking with you again. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing, Carol?
Doing well, trying to keep up. As you know, the news flow kind of fast and furious. Let's talk about the economic backdrop, because your roots, right, when you started out, you are an economist and you think about things, the macro environment, the jobs report today, some strength, maybe some concerns about things starting to slow down. What does the U.S. economic environment look like to you, the business environment as well, and what it means for some of your investments?
Sure. It looks like that corporations are losing pricing power, and we are now beginning to see the unemployment rate move up. It went up to 3.9% in this latest report, from a low of 3.4%. So undeniably, it's on its way up now. And we do think it's because corporations are losing pricing power, their margins are getting hit. It's going to cause a couple of things. One, the labor hoarding that we've seen since COVID is going to diminish, and that will increase the unemployment rate. But then the second thing is it will accelerate the adoption of technologies. Innovation solves problems. And one of the things that it does is increase productivity, increase efficiency, and create new products and services. So we're pretty optimistic about our strategy in this environment because interest rates should come down. I think that even the Fed is going to be surprised at how low inflation goes. We think it could be negative this year.
Well, so Cathie, let me ask you that's interesting. I mean, if the expectations, at least according to traders right now, is that the first rate cut comes in June, is that too late in your view for the Fed to start cutting rates?
Well, I think the 24-fold increase in interest rates in little more than a year has shocked the system. We're beginning to see a reverberation of the regional bank issues. We don't think they are going away. Deposits are still outflowing broadly from the banking system. And there are increasing problems with commercial real estate. Most people know about the office problems. But multifamily units, multifamily apartments, we're beginning to see some distressed sales there as well. So I think that problem isn't as well understood, I think, and it's going to cause the regional banks even more problems.
Cathie, how quickly do you think unemployment can go up this year? What are you forecasting over at ARK?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised to see the unemployment rate go above 5%. Now, I'm saying that knowing that this is an election year and that this administration probably will try and spend more than is currently in the budgets through executive order or what have you. But above 5% would not surprise us.
All right, so above 5%. Well, that's interesting. All right, so we have a good idea of your economic and kind of macro backdrop. Having said that, so here we are sitting at a day where we're seeing a little bit of a pullback in stocks, but year to date, the S&P still up more than 7%. We're looking at a NASDAQ 100 that's also up more than 7%. you look at something like the SOX is up around 20% year to date. Pick an individual name like an NVIDIA up more than 80%, and I could go on and on and on. There are many who talk about a bubble. Some liken it back to 99, 2000. Anything in today's equity trade that says bubble to you?
We do not believe we are in a bubble anything like we were in the late 90s. I was there, and the technologies weren't ready. The costs were too high, too much capital, chased too few opportunities too soon. The seeds for what is happening now were planted during the 20 years that ended in the tech and telecom bubble, and they've been germinating for 25 or 30 years. So we believe we're ready for prime time. The one place where we could see a correction, and it's just a correction, we're not calling it the end of this at all, is in the chip space. Whenever I hear the word shortage, and we started hearing about GPU shortages about this time last year, as ChatGPT was capturing the imagination of both businesses and consumers. So for about a year, we've heard that word, and now we're seeing lead times, we believe, come down for GPUs, for NVIDIA in particular, from the 8 to 11 month range to the 3 to 4 month range. So that is suggesting that there was probably a lot of double and triple ordering as the word shortage was making the rounds, and that those inventories will have to be digested.
But is that also because of an increase in supply in terms of output, or is it because you think demand is going down? Which one is it?
Oh, I don't think, no, demand is not going down, though there is something we expect that I don't hear discussed very much, and it harkens back to the early days of the internet. There was a moment when the internet was taking off, when Cisco was all the rage, and then enterprises started thinking seriously about the need to spend aggressively on this new thing called the internet and the backbone, and they paused as a lot of competition started to make the rounds. And Cisco went down 50% plus as enterprises were pausing. Now, why are enterprises likely to pause or at least go through an assessment? They have to integrate all of their data first. Proprietary data is the secret to AI's success. And they have to map out in excruciating detail their workflows internally and with suppliers and customers and so forth. And this is going to take time. So we think this movement is real. It's going to be massive. But we think there's been a little bit too much too soon.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that, Kathy, because you and at ARC were very early to acknowledge the impact of AI. Yet your flagship ARC Innovation ETF has not held shares of NVIDIA in about a year. You do own some of it in your other ETFs. Do you have any regrets about not having held on to the stock or actually increasing your exposure in the last couple of years after more than 530% gain since 2022, since the end of 2022?
Yes. So you're right. We were very early into NVIDIA 10 years ago when it was $5. Now it's roughly $800. And we rode it most of the way up. But I'll tell you what we did. And this is, as a portfolio manager, it's not one action, but what it causes in terms of another action. Last year, we sold in the flagship NVIDIA and put it into Coinbase. Coinbase, I believe, is up at least as much as NVIDIA. And it is much less well understood. The whole crypto movement, the crypto asset movement, Bitcoin as a new asset class and so forth, is not well understood or completely accepted out there. So we prefer to go where others are not traveling as much. And, you know, as we were moving out of NVIDIA, we were saying, okay, regulators are trying to crush Coinbase here, and we were buying it on every dip. NVIDIA happened to be one of the sources for that purchase. So it's not just what we do on the sell side; it is what we do on the buy side that you have to look at. And yes, we do hold it in the more specialized funds, but we've been taking profits there as well for reasons I just described.
Yeah, and to be fair, you're right. Coinbase is up about 620% since the end of 2022. So that compares with about 530% gain in NVIDIA. Is there anything, though, Kathy, in the NVIDIA story that would make you rethink the name and want to become more aggressive on it?
Yeah, if the price came down a lot, we would. You know, the rate of return expectations
Or a split?
we have.
Would a split do it? Because I know we've been
No,
kind of
no,
Okay.
that wouldn't change. That wouldn't change anything. No, no, split adjusted then the price. So, you know, if you look at our portfolios, what we're trying to capitalize on with a Palantir, for example, are the next stages of this AI revolution. What we're seeing in the GPU side of things is NVIDIA, all praise to Jensen Huang. I mean, just unbelievable company execution, vision, and so forth. And it's not over. It's going to last a long time. But there are going to be many other companies benefiting from AI. The productivity lift alone is going to be massive, the most massive productivity lift in history, we believe. And so this AI revolution is going to be broad-based and is going to benefit a lot of companies. On the GPU side, of course, we have AMD as competition, but many people do not understand that there's a lot of other surreptitious competition evolving out there. Each of the hyperscalers is evolving its own chip strategy. You have a Tesla that has designed its own chip for an AI chip for the more specialized autonomous driving opportunity. And I think you're going to see a lot of companies developing more specialized chips. We know that NVIDIA, of course, will segment the market as well. So we just think that a lot of the assumptions for NVIDIA, you know, that this is NVIDIA's market and it's alone, that those are changing.
Well, we're speaking with Kathy Wood, if you're just joining us. She's the founder and CEO and Chief Investment Officer of ARK Invest. She joins us from St. Petersburg, Florida.
So it's interesting, Kathy, too, to, you know, everybody seems to be out there making chips. And it's funny, we had a conversation yesterday with Chris Miller, who wrote the book Chip Wars, and we talked about TSMC, that everybody can kind of design what they want, but ultimately right now they've got to come back to TSMC as the fabricator to make them. So as you say that, I mean, you guys in one of your funds, I think late last month, was selling shares of TSMC. I am curious about then your thinking around TSMC. There's a story today too about TSMC winning more than $5 billion in grants for their U.S. chip plant. So money, you know, certainly being devoted to them. Why maybe pull back a little bit on TSMC, or what is your case for TSMC in the long run?
Well, the case for TSMC is, yes, it is the manufacturer of these merchant chips. So a very big story there. But this is simply a cyclical call. And it has to do with that word shortage. And TSMC, for example, Broadcom reported last night. I listened to that call. In the semiconductor solutions part of their business, they were up only 4%, AI up 35%, but everything else down. So there are some cyclical phenomena out there that we think are they're not being integrated into the short-term expectations for a number of stocks.
Hey,
including
So, Kathy, I want to move on to Tesla because you brought it up a moment ago. You've been a long-time bull on Tesla. You have been buying shares recently after selling them for most of 2023. The stock down about 30% so far this year. We covered the news this week that shipments from Tesla's Shanghai factory sank to the lowest in over a year in February. The challenges facing the EV industry have been well documented. We talked about those a lot. Why do you still like Tesla, considering all of the challenges in the EV space and also what many critics would say are disappointing fundamentals?
So yes, you're right. We were selling last year as it was in the $300 to $400 range. It's back to $175. And this is what portfolio managers do. We have a 5-year investment time horizon for Tesla, and our price expectations from here, I mean, we see roughly a 7 to 10-fold increase. I know we're in the process of revising our model, so I'm not at liberty to give you the new number. But
would that new number be higher or lower than 2,000?
Well, we're pushing it out a year, and therefore it will be higher because the autonomous taxi platform opportunity will be in full force, we think, and we believe that Tesla will get the lion's share of that market here in the US, if not elsewhere. Autonomous taxi platforms are SaaS models. Tesla's current gross margin is, well, it's in the teens right now because it's been cutting prices, but we think normalized, the EV margin is in the 30% range. SaaS margins are in the 80% range. Most analysts focusing on the stock have nothing in their models, or very little, for autonomous. Our confidence that autonomous is going to happen has increased because it has happened. We see Waymo successful. We see a lot of success and commercial success, that is, in China. It can be done. We think Tesla will launch a national service. And Tesla, this is where AI comes in. Tesla has orders of magnitude more data than all of the other auto and tech companies going after this market combined. And what's important about that is that it has corner cases that nobody else has. Rare occurrences on the roads that it has recorded and it is prepared for, but others aren't.
Kathy,
they just don't have.
I just want to jump in. It's kind of like a running joke with the Tesla community, because Elon Musk says every year we're going to have this autonomous driving technology, and every year since he started saying it, 2017, 2018, it has failed to materialize. Why are you so confident it's going to happen in the near future?
Well, because it has happened, as I just said, and so it's not if, it is when. That's the most important reason. Interestingly, in his last conference call, Tesla's last conference call, Elon said, yeah, I know I've been wrong about it, so I'm not even going to make a projection. I actually thought that was good, and maybe it has a better shot now. And we're looking at some of their hiring and their job postings and seeing rumblings in different cities that they're starting to get ready.
Hey, Kathy, something I know I brought up this with you before, but I think back to you and my first interview back in May of 2014, so almost 10 years ago. But you brought up Elon Musk when he wasn't a household name or what his company was doing, and you likened him to Thomas Edison. And I guess what I want to ask you, you know this individual, you talk with him, you followed him obviously for a long time. Do you ever feel, do you feel that way still about him in terms of likening to someone like Thomas Edison? And how do you find clarity and feel comfort in some of the questionable and controversial things that Elon comments on or that he says?
Yes, well, we're focused on the technology, and as is he. He is the inventor of our age, and this age is a very special age because the 5 major innovation platforms around which we have centered our research are converging, and 3 of them he is helping to converge. This autonomous taxi platform opportunity is the convergence of robotics. Autonomous vehicles are robots. Energy storage, they will be electric.
Right.
And artificial intelligence, where those are 3 separate S-curves feeding each other. And should lead to super exponential growth. He has understood this idea that technologies are going to converge with one another. And that is the way he's been thinking. He's first principles research. Just because something's been done one way for a very long time, think autos, doesn't mean it's going to remain that way. And that's why he's going to win.
Do you ever feel, though, that he gets distracted or can be too much?
He is so laser focused on technology, and he in the case of Tesla, the electric vehicle side, that is on automatic pilot. They are just scaling, and what he is doing is becoming, the manufacturer of factories. He's trying to figure out how to automate and continue to drive down the costs there. His focus is on autonomous now, certainly. And of course, you can say on X he's distracted, but he's really more focused on the innovation. How can I go back to the future where I started, which was in the payments app space, sold to PayPal? How can I turn this into not only a payments app, but an everything app? And I think he's hard at work doing that in ways that we don't know yet.
We are, of course, talking with Cathie Wood. She's the CEO, CIO, and, of course, founder of ARK Invest, joining us from Florida.
Hey, Cathie, you're talking about the future of transportation. We got to talk about Archer Aviation. One of the most read stories today is about the company that you've been buying up. It's a developer of air taxis, Archer Aviation. Your stake, around 10% across several of your ETFs. You're the third largest investor in the name. We should note shares down roughly 30% so far this year. As our own Sam Potter writes today, you are once again on the other side of a short call made by Grizzly Research. Last time you were in a similar spot regarding a different name, Too Simple. You lost a lot and eventually sold most of your position. So talk to us about why you believe in Archer, and does it ever worry you to go against these short sellers?
So our investment process is centered around research and original research. I'll start with Too Simple. We sold Too Simple after the CEO, who was the technology visionary, left. And so Grizzly got that right. I don't think for the right reasons, although we were in the teeth of a massive bear market as well. If that CEO had not left, I don't think we would have sold that stock. In the case of Archer, we have a high degree of confidence in Archer. One thing to understand about ARK is we are the closest. ARK is the closest you'll find to a venture capital company in the public equity markets. And we tread where others in the traditional asset management world will not go, at least on the public side, when we see a real opportunity. As we're doing our work on autonomous vehicles, we concluded that the cost is going to drop so much that roads are going to become very congested in the future, much more congested, if you can imagine, New York City. And so we then started doing work about transportation in the skies. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. The FAA is the gating factor from a regulatory point of view. There are two companies the FAA is working very closely with, and I think because of successes elsewhere in the world, other companies are having success where regulators have not been as strict. I think there's been a little more pressure on the FAA to pay close attention here. And the two are Archer and Joby. Our confidence went up when Boeing, which was suing it for patent infringement, settled the case and actually took an ownership position in Archer, as has Stellantis and United Airlines. So three very deep-pocketed partners who are also trying to figure out the future of transportation. And we know that they're on their way, both Joby and Archer, to FAA certification. Seems like the process is in motion, and we haven't had a hiccup. And it has an MOU with Abu Dhabi to launch an air taxi service in 26. And pending regulation, it has an MOU with Interglobe to launch an air taxi service in India. Both of those have been much better from a regulatory point of view.
But how big of a concern is it to you that regulators here in the U.S. could drag their feet? We did speak with an airline executive recently who is concerned that the FAA is moving slower than other regulatory bodies when it comes to this type of technology.
Yes, and that is why we pay a lot of attention to regulatory arbitrage. We've seen innovation move abroad to other countries, even Amazon. The FAA wouldn't let Amazon fly its drones, ninth generation, nearly 10 years ago, on its own property outside. So it went to India and elsewhere. I think the pressure's on the FAA now. And I also think that the bear market of 21 and 22 eliminated a lot of other competition that was brewing. Just the funding markets were closed. And so I think this market is much more, that both Joby and Archer are going to have much more share than otherwise would have been the case. So we're pretty excited about the possibilities here.
Hey, Kathy, as you said, one of the things about ARC, it's certainly in its DNA, is that you go places and take positions that other people maybe don't do. And one of the things, though, that increasingly I feel like the financial establishment, again, is interested very much so is in crypto. And I want to talk about your spot Bitcoin ETF, if I may, the ARC 21 shares Bitcoin ETF. What can you tell us about institutional interest in it? Is there, or is it mostly the funds that are going into it are mostly from the retail side?
Well, we know there's institutional interest because we're talking to a lot of institutions, including state treasurers and public pension funds. And why is this? Because they're trying to figure out if this truly is a new asset class. And if it is, they must have a point of view. As a fiduciary, if there's a new